You were the most tech-savvy person I knew in school. I would have never thought that you would turn into a journalist.
I didn't really plan on being a journalist.
Young people are not reading. How do you inculcate that?
Gen Z really likes to read content on Instagram. There are a million things the reader can do besides read your stories. So you better make it interesting.
Do you believe everybody is in the content game?
It's everywhere, right? A lot of people take a negative reaction to the word content.
Right. I get my news from Twitter. I find it very hard to pay for news. I respect that profession and the effort put in, but I don't think I'll ever pay for news. If a news is really important, it'll reach me. Even though I used to get Madras Courier's newsletters.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, I had to block it afterwards. What's your learning process? How do you keep yourself updated?
I find myself addicted to reading. It's like each bit of news I consume is like 30 ml of Pepsi.
We really don't care about how many people are reading. It's more about how many people are seeing. Is that anger or jealousy?
You know, I feel envious. You need to be in a bigger publication before you have the independence to do dangerous stories.
I think for the longest time, publications have been at war with Meta, unnecessarily.
I think we're getting closer to the truth here. I think another medium has to emerge for truth and information.
How?
I don't know, I just think it has to. Maybe I'll build it, like, you know.
What is the future of media then? Do you think news entities as what they are right now will die? So thanks man for doing this.
Hey, anytime.
Just to the folks who are watching this, I've known Varun for like what, 20 plus years now?
Almost 20 years. 2005, right? Yeah.
2005? I don't know. Maybe like I was 12 then. So yeah.
Class 8,
13.
I think class 8.
Yeah,
But we were in different classes.
Probably. But I've known you for the longest time. It's kind of strange because, you know, we were just chatting a while back and I told you how you were the most tech-savvy person I knew in school, right? If we needed games pirated, if we needed software hacked, if we needed anything, I would come to you. Obviously, you had a group of people that probably were doing the same, but I would have never thought that you would turn into a journalist. Simply put. So what happened? Are there parts of your early life that I don't know about?
I think so. So my dad was a journalist.
Oh,
so,
I don't know that actually.
Oh, okay. I mean, I think that was also a big factor for why I was interested in the space. And it gave me a slight edge, not because he helped me get jobs and things, but because he taught me how to write and edit at a very early age. Mm-hmm. And he gave me a knack. And he also, I think the main thing was he convinced me that it was a very interesting profession to be in. So my mom used to tell me that it's nice being married to a journalist because when they come back from work, it's something different they'll talk about every day because that's the news cycle. Whereas, you know, if a person's like doing a tile business or something, they will just come back and talk about tiles like the whole time. So that was the cool thing about being married to my dad. And I felt like that was also cool because I would go home and I'd actually be interested in what he had to say. I didn't really plan on being a journalist when I started out. I was super into multimedia and I wanted to be a cinematographer, video editor, an animator. And I think why I ended up going to journalism was just it, you know, when you're starting out in your career, my skill set seemed to align. And I took it up and I found out that, hey, this is one job where you can use all the skills you want to get good at. You want to get good at video, design and writing and editing. It's a great place to be in. So I think that's sort of what led me there. But it definitely wasn't something I was thinking of even in school. I never really
because you did science and science ISE is kind of hard. Like had... I remember chemistry fucked my life. Like I couldn't even think about doing that course, but you did it. And then I remember we went to college and then you were in Joseph's. Yeah. You were doing arts and science, right? I
did visual communication.
Yeah, that was like such a flip.
I mean, it's not really, if you consider the moment you get your board results, that determines a lot of stuff, right? So for me, I was doing science because I grew up in like in Saudi Arabia and the world was ruled by oil. And I had this thought that, you know, we need nuclear energy to get rid of this oil economy. So I literally did science thinking that one day I will solve the energy crisis and I will make India nuclear and stuff. And then I got like 44 in physics in 12th and I'm looking at that and I'm like, I don't think I'm going to be a scientist. Probably not happening. So after that, I was just applying to courses and this course called Visual Communication had just started blowing up at the time. So my college was, I think, one of the first to start in Bangalore. It had already become a thing in Chennai at the time. I think if you see the media industry now, a lot of people are former Viscomites, people who've done Viscom. Viscom is a really cool degree when you're a little ADHD and you want to do a little bit of everything because I didn't want to just study journalism. I wanted to study many different things. And Viscom will be like each semester you learn a different aspect of media and ultimately a different aspect of like art. And it was just fun. It was the most fun and best time of my life to do that course. So when I was just picking degrees like what to apply for, it seemed like a smart bet because I felt like, okay, I could get into a lot of fun sounding industries. And I think that's how it happened.
And after that, you went to Oxford.
No, I took a 1 year thing. I did a 1 year diploma in Manipal, where I studied filmmaking.
You studied a lot, that means.
Relatively, but media. Like I did study stuff that was a little bit more practical. And every degree I've done, like media-wise, has been stuff that, you know, they don't hire you for the degree. They hire you for how good you are and your experience. Your experience actually counts a lot more. And I was always a little uncertain. I always had this fear when I was studying that, dude, I need to start working ASAP because it's all about experience. So like my boss right now was actually same batch as me, but he didn't, do degrees like while I was studying. He just started off in the industry, and that puts him like a few levels higher than me. He has a lot more experience than I do. I feel like in this field, it's like in journalism, it remains the case that it's not about degrees. But today you will see a lot more journalists have media degrees. But if you see in the 80s, 90s, like the people who are top level journalists now, or senior most journalists now, very few of them studied journalism. Most of them would be engineers or maybe a lit graduate at best. It was always this field where you can get in from whatever line of work you're in.
Right. True. Actually, that I think of it. How's the experience in Oxford? I remember that famous, I think, the RSS head, right? Ram Madhav.
Oh yeah, he gave a talk there.
He gave a talk with Mehdi Hassan, and you were in the crowd.
I was in the crowd.
And I spotted you. I remember taking a screenshot and sending it to you. And that interview actually went quite viral, right? Because there's a lot of controversial shit, some taken out of context and stuff, and that is just before the election.
Yeah, it blew up. That was also. So that was also when Oxford Union, which is it's like a debating club sort of thing that is there. Their videos started to blow up. And in a very YouTube friendly format, because you know these union talks are very old. Stuff's been happening for, I don't know, centuries maybe or decades, let's say. And before Mehdi Hassan, there was a talk by Shashi Tharoor on I think decolonization,
repercussions and stuff.
Exactly. I feel like this was the first time I saw what is actually academic debates, right, coming into the public sphere, because that format is so good for a quick bite, for 10 minutes of like just zingers going back and forth. If you sit and listen to the whole talk, it's insightful. If you just take 10 minutes, maybe you hear what you want to hear. You can, like, there were people who watched that Mehdi Hassan talk who liked Mehdi Hassan's point of view. There are people who liked what Ram Madhav said. Both sides seem to think the other side really like knocked it out of the park.
Was it the right or was it the left?
More or less. It pretty much was that. The interesting thing about that format is just that it really lets people talk. It's like the OG podcast, I feel.
Right.
But there is something different about a debate. A debate is performative. So Boris Johnson, right, if you see what makes him successful is that he's a very classic debater. He comes from that background of, going to Oxford Union, winning these debates, coming back. The art of winning them is a lot less about, I would say, facts than it is about charisma and persuasiveness. So yeah, that was like one of the things I really thought was surprising about Oxford was you don't everyone has imposter syndrome.
Right.
So everyone you meet, you will immediately realize that these are pretty intelligent people. Nobody thinks they belong there.
Right.
And I think that could have been unique to my set of people because I was in the social sciences, and a lot of people were from outside the UK. They were from all over the world,
Right.
Argentinians and Bangladeshis and Indians and stuff. And I think they were generally people who were driven to social change. My course was kind of for social scientists. A lot of journalists have done this course. Arnab Goswami came from my course. Sagrika Ghosh also came from, not my course, but from my college. So there they have colleges, which a bunch of courses in them. And I think Oxford was that way, a chance to just realize that you can talk to very intelligent people very casually. And I think some of the most intelligent people there were super informal. You could just walk in and chat with them and stuff. There were no airs. And I think that's one thing I really realized when I compared to Oxford and here, I feel like the top level experts there are so down to earth and grounded. But if you were to write their CV down, you'd be writing a book. It's very intense. Oxford, the one thing it taught me was just when you want to understand a topic, right? You have to understand it to the point where you realize that, holy shit, I need my entire life to understand it.
Right.
And you need to be able to see the ocean. You think it's a lake and then you realize it's an ocean. It kind of gave me a sort of paralysis for a while because I was starting to think, man, I wanted to understand so much stuff about this world. And it made me think that, wow, it takes a lot of work to really understand something. You want to have a macroeconomic understanding of a national economy. And you realize that if you want to academically study this, you can probably study a single road in Bangalore. And that's going to take you 5 or 10 years of hardcore academic research if you want to say something concrete about it. So Oxford sort of humbled me that way. It really made me respectful of like fields and how much there is to learn and stuff. And I think that was cool. It's cool like that it makes you hungry for knowledge and thirst for knowledge. But it also makes you realize that you should be learning as much as you can every single day. They don't teach you that much in Oxford. One of the models they have there is very much like just throwing you in, okay, here's the course, here are like the speakers, we're going to talk about this and this. How you figure stuff out, you're on your own. There's really not like as much as India, I would say, like personal tutoring and stuff like that. You're expected to sort of figure things out. There's this huge library with every book on earth. Go there and like spend time, talk to people, figure stuff out.
That's the best, right? Self-exploration is like priceless.
I think it's good, but there are some disadvantages. Like I think if you're coming from India,
you learn the wrong things.
No, we're not. India doesn't train you very well in academic writing. So you might, put in the work, but if you don't know like a 5-paragraph setup for making an argument, right, it can be a liability there because you have only 1 year in a master's program there. You're spending 6 months of it learning how to get it right. That's half your marks that are probably going to go by then.
Right.
That was a slightly tricky thing. And there were a lot of stuff Indians had to unlearn, like basic plagiarism. Like I think, let's say like fair, most people are not going to plagiarize from somebody else. But in foreign universities and stuff, you realize that, hey, you can't plagiarize from even your own essays, right? If you wrote something last semester, you can't just take a sentence from that in the next essay. Write it different, write it again.
And they keep a check on all that?
They really take your case.
But how, is it digital, like what you write, or is it just...
Digitalized? I think they use Turnitin and they have all your previous essays. So they have a tool that will just cross-check that, hey, has this been said before or not? And it's a very
when did they implement, like when did they put in place this tool? I'm just curious.
Turnitin?
Yeah.
I think Turnitin's been common in academia globally for probably 15, 18 years.
Okay.
And even if it's not, if you've ever tried to, like in content, sometimes you do need to plagiarism check what writers send you. You are Googling paragraph by paragraph and then Google will highlight if like 1 or 2 lines comes from here. And then we have tools like small SEO tools and all now. I think that's always been there. A paid tool called Turnitin is common in academia. They usually use that.
Right.
The interesting thing is like, it's not like they're saying don't refer other people. If you're going to refer someone, acknowledge them. So indirectly say like Saanand Warrier in a podcast had said this and this. Don't just take what Saanand said and pass it off as something you said. That is where they're sort of coming from, which I kind of respect.
Yeah, it makes sense. That's fascinating. I don't know. I mean, like, I asked this to every single guest who's ever come, asking them if what they studied and that final degree that they did it move the needle for them professionally? Like, did that make some kind of a difference? Either it opened door for the next, say, platform, or made you sort of toughened and seasoned for the next job, whatever it might be. But do you feel it moved the needle for you?
It's weird because I had done my BSc in visual communication from Joseph's in Bangalore.
Yeah.
I think that is the degree I'm proudest of. Like I worked really hard in that. I was a gold medalist. I loved the course.
That's because you came from science.
I came from science. Exactly, actually. Like I've noticed there were engineers in my batch. The guys who were almost engineers, right? You were so grateful that you get to work in media because it is just so much better than the alternative of that slog that you have to do to find a good tech job, right? And you're grateful. And when you're grateful, you love your work and it's not work for you. That was when I started doing like all-nighters working and stuff, and I wouldn't feel it. It wasn't like when I did an all-nighter to study where you feel it. When you're in media and you like what you do, it's not work. Which is something my dad likes to keep telling me. Like, I never worked a day in my life. And I'm like, I saw you work many days and nights. But he wasn't seeing it as work.
Right.
That way, I think Viscom pushed the needle for me in the sense that it gave me very monetizable skills that I can use in the industry. Like, I can be useful to a lot of people. Oxford, I think, gave me a mindset. And I wouldn't say it didn't help me because like my first job was because I met a dude on the road in Oxford. Like he was a documentary filmmaker and we just actually bumped into each other. And we started talking about media and stuff. And I was always very interested in how the media works.
Right.
And things led to another, and he started a company called Madras Courier, and I was the first employee, first writer. That is how I got my first job. But I think that was a network effect. It really wasn't the degree as much. It was just being on that road when he was cycling by at that time. To be very honest, I really call this I feel like it is still about network effects. It's being at certain places, certain rooms at the right time. Those are your most prized, networks after a point of time. So it's very mixed. When I came to India, what I needed, I didn't want to work in the UK. I wanted to come back and work in India.
Why?
Well, honestly, part of me just thought I wouldn't get a job there. Like, it was just hard. And you have to get a job that pays a certain amount if you want to qualify for a visa. And media jobs tend not to be there. Like media jobs start at a very low pay scale.
Right.
But also, my course was about India, and
is
I
that,
felt.
by the way, all of media? Sorry, but is that all of media? Does the pay start low for like, even if you maybe on a news show on a primetime channel versus writing for an obscure publication, would that still be the same? Like relatively, would that still be low?
If you're starting out, yeah, it's low everywhere.
And why so? Like just because I think media as a business is highly profitable, right? Not traditional, but if you have a hybrid mix between digital, or if you're running a news channel, for example, let's say, you are assumed to be profitable, if I'm not wrong.
You have to look at the work it takes to get there, right?
Right.
Like, to start a news channel is very expensive, and if you're starting and you're on day one of your company and you're trying to get top level experts, you're trying to get people to come talk on your show, you need journalists who are senior enough to get these people. It can get very unprofitable very quickly. So I think when you're talking about, like, say, Times Now or something like that, right? Like, they've reached such a huge number that yes, there is probably money, but no one's going to be an intern and just like on day one be an anchor in Times
for
Now.
Sure.
It's a very top down kind of thing. So I would give other examples. Like, I think, it was considered like a privilege to get an internship in a newspaper, and even now a lot of newspapers don't pay interns. You will do a lot of work. So when I had interned at the Hindu in 2011, and I did about 11 byline stories in a month, and I was just running around all the time, learning the hell out of everything. It was such a learning experience, but I was super working. I worked 2 weeks straight without weekends. Now when I see discourse on social media about unpaid internships and stuff, I have to ask myself, that one internship was very useful to me. Like, it's still in my CV now, just to let recruiters know that, hey, I can pull off this workload. I've done it. So that way, in some parts of media, in news especially, there's not a lot of jobs. To be able to experience the work and prove that you can do it is seen as, it's a kind of privilege, I feel. And that sort of may be why that the entry level is not paid as well as it should be.
Right.
And again, profits don't necessarily trickle down. And again, places that are doing journalism, right, it really does not pay. It's not a very rich industry.
Yeah.
The monetization model is very advertiser driven, or let's say, that's it. Yeah, that's it. That is the model. There is subscription driven and there's advertiser driven, and both of these affect your editorial. And that's one of the big debates in media. If you don't want to be beholden to advertisers, you go for subscriptions.
Yeah.
The problem is there are only so many people who pay for news, and
it's hard.
There are already so many people to subscribe to.
Yeah, because like you spoke of Madras Korea, I think they were one of those platforms, right?
Yeah,
you have to subscribe. I don't think you have to pay, but you have to subscribe to get their news.
Yeah, now you have to pay. It's all paywalled.
Okay, great. I get my news from Twitter. Like, I just hashtag search and I find and I go through it. I mean, there are 20 accounts with 20 point of views, but you filter through all of them and you get a sense of what it is. And then maybe a 3-minute search on Twitter gives you understanding of what it is, or a reaction to people putting things out, or following individuals, whatever that may be. I find it very hard to pay for news. I think, I don't know. I mean, there's a good debate to have maybe, but I think it's information. And I don't know how information can be commoditized. I'm a believer that all information needs to be open source and free. It just helps.
Same, I kind of am there.
Yeah, but at the same time, if someone's putting in the work to collate and give it to you, you might as well pay for that service.
I think so.
Yeah. So it's a very interesting thing. I think I respect that profession and the effort put in, but I don't think I'll ever pay for news. So I think I would always, if I was a customer, the publication would have to rely on advertising.
I agree, and I have views on this, but I also really believe that we should be listening to readers. Like, it's like people who can't consume any type of content. You can't be sitting in Netflix and be like, I think people need to watch more samurai shows, right? Like, that's not how you want to approach content. You want to try to tell great stories because you talk to readers, you realize they want great stories. The thing with news is, I like what you just described is reading multiple stuff, filtering it, and walking away. Not walking, but you get your takeaways from that. Is, I think, a attempt towards objectively decoding the news, which I believe in an ideal world everyone should be doing. You should never read one news article and be like, this is the news, I'm not gonna. You gotta go as many as you can
into that same topic, right?
Now the thing is, people are busy, so I respect that you don't have time to read 5 newspapers at once, and you it's also like you need to read news information at different levels. Let's say level 1 is a quick news report and level 2 is a more detailed investigative report. where journalists are digging out new information that doesn't exist elsewhere. And let's say level 3, which for me I believe is probably the most truth-making level. 5-10 years later, a bunch of academics go and study the dynamics of that particular news story. So if we're talking about a protest in a steel plant, about people saying that their lands and livelihoods are being taken away by this new construction, the news story will just say there was a protest against the steel plant, locals were agitating against this, police fired upon them, And then academics will come 10 years later, let's say, study the history of that whole village, study how many years and years and years they were having socioeconomic problems, how the plant came, how it displaced them, all that stuff. It takes time to paint a very deep and nuanced picture of reality. Journalism is basically just one of the filters in the world that is charged with sort of constructing reality and trying to describe what's happening. So my point is, for the reader, right? If you really want to understand something, it's going to take a lot of your time to really dig to. And if you don't have that time, you need something
just
quick.
Time also, it's also habit, right? Like, let's say I think your introduction to news and consumption of information is sort of cultural, like how your family or who you will live with consumed it is how you will also start, and then you'll break away from that and create your own patterns. How do you train someone to be that intuitive to go and, because you can't, right? I think it just comes down to interest. For example, we were just talking about this. I mean, I have great interest in football. If there's in football-centric news that comes through, because of my natural interest, I will go deep into it and try to understand. And I think there's a great publication in the sports world that's come through. It's called The Athletic. I don't know if you follow it, but my God, man, they make some very good stuff. Like, it is so in-depth, and you sort of have this, like, there's already built that if you want the truth and if you want to go deep into a subject, you go to Athletic. But at the same time, there's also at the same time a Fabrizio Romano. Like, we'll go deeper into that at some point in time. But he gives you a lot of quick information on the top, surface level, and you sort of get width, right? You can't go deep, but you get width. And like you said, in today's day and age when there's no time, you naturally like sort of gravitate towards the width over depth. You pick and choose. You might consume 10 pieces of information that's wide enough, a little bit. Like, say now the trend is to do it in 280 characters, right?
Yeah.
So you do it, and then if something interests you, go deeper. When there is no interest, how do you nudge someone to go deeper? Because I think, again, a very interesting thing happened like last week. One of the largest Hindi newspapers in the country reached out to us for a campaign, and the brief was very simple. It said, young people are not reading. It's not young people are not reading newspaper. Young people are not reading, period. Like, how do we change that? And they wanted a campaign, for that. I think it's an uphill battle. They're not reading because I think the mediums have changed. But from the news publication perspective or a journalistic perspective, how do you inculcate that? How do you enable or how do you encourage someone to be a truth seeker or an information seeker? Or can it be done?
Can I bounce a question back
Sure.
to you though? Why do you actually want to know sports news? Like, you get this information. What do you do with that information?
Interesting. I think because of the time that I invest in watching sport, and generally the kind of admiration I have for athletes, and because I played a lot of sport, it from early days, it's part of my lifestyle. So there's two folds to it. Because I spend time, I want to know more. The other one is because I'm such a, say, student or a fanatic of the game and sport in general, I want to be a know-it-all as well. So thirst for knowledge comes from there too. Now, having said that, I do exhibit that same tendencies when, for example, the CAA bill came, right?
Yeah.
Initially, there was an uproar. Then there was obviously details in it. I was sort of, that curiosity drove me to go and read and what that is. So I did that for a period of time. But then again, that is, I think, incidental.
But let me go back to sports though.
Sure.
The first reason, like, you want to know more, there's still a why. I could ask why again.
Sure.
I think the second one, let's say you want to be known for knowing sports. Look at situations. No, you have, I'm sure, friends outside of work. So, and I think that's where people really like unwind. You're talking to your friends about sports, right?
I was going to mention that,
You won't have anything to talk to them about unless you don't know following the news.
Sure, that's one. The other thing also, I think it subliminally somewhere it makes you feel good to know it all.
Okay, so that's another thing I've been thinking about a lot, and I think that's something we wanted to discuss later. This idea that everything is content.
Yeah.
And again, it might vary from people. So it's a tough question what you asked me. How do you convince people to find information? I personally believe that they already do seek it out. It's just that they're consuming it in a different way. People are consuming information in the same medium and way and manner that they consume entertainment and reels. And what it is you are taking the short burst of information. It's making you feel smarter, or it's making you feel like you understand something more. Learning is a process that happens in the brain, right? Like when you learn something new, your neurons are making new connections. It's improving something called plasticity and stuff. And that can give you a kick. It's small dopamine kick, right? It's probably like, I think sometimes I find myself addicted to reading. So I'll be with friends at a table, or my mom or girlfriend, and they're talking, and I'm just still reading news and tweets in between chats. It's like each bit of news I consume is like, let's say, 30 ml of Pepsi. There is a lot of dopamine in 30 ml of Pepsi, and I feel like that's what I'm sort of hooked to. And I think in some form or the other, most people are hooked to learning or consuming stuff in that way. It's just about what do they want to do with it sometimes. I think, for example, sports fans, let's say you've got a group and you're meeting every day. And there was a match last night. And by the way, I don't know sports at all. So I do get the references you mentioned, like Fabrizio and The Athletic.
Yeah.
That's actually because my sports friends sent me their articles just as an example of the craft being good.
Yeah.
And I really love that. Like, even if I don't care about sports, he sends me well-written pieces sometimes. So I get an idea of, wow, this is what real sports writing looks like. And it's beautiful. Even though I kind of despise sports sometimes. Like, it's just so boring to me sometimes. But I think my interest in sports comes also from my interest in information. I like to know stuff about things that I can talk to people and connect with them on. Like if I meet a was it Chelsea a few years ago? They were supposed to be bought out by the Saudis or something?
No, they got bought out by an American.
There was talks with Saudi to buy it.
This whole...
it didn't work.
Russians owned... I mean, Roman Abramovich owned it. He had to sell because of the repercussions and the problem with the war and stuff.
So I love talking about politics and geopolitics. And when I was in a room with sports people, it's not easy to weave that in.
Yeah.
But when this happened, suddenly I could get a bunch of like sports fans to discuss Russia and discuss Saudi Arabia because it's intruded into their world. Right. So likewise, when you're with a bunch of friends, and I often notice this, it's a turn-based system of talking. You have all seen the match last night. None of you is going to get away with, this team won. You need to have a little more, right? So everyone has this incentive to go dig out, read deeper, listen to podcasts, see comments, find cultural references. And if you look at it that way, if you look at big news brands covering sports, right? They are covering sports at all levels of depth, which means that there's also original reportage, like say goal.com, actually in the clubs, what's happening there. But then there's also reportage, which is like, hey, this player posted this reel and this other player from another team commented on it. And I know it's tempting to mock that as being news, but there are people who are interested in stuff like that. It's something that's happened and your job is to report what happens. So, and I like Vice's tagline. Their tagline for a long time was your definitive guide to enlightening information.
Right.
I think any information that is enlightening to you, whatever it may be, right? As long as you develop the habit to seek that out and make sure that you're seeking it out from a good place, it's more the news's job to find you.
So, and that behavior what you just said is the same with politics, because a lot of older men, I would presume, would probably have social gatherings, and then politics becomes a source of conversation. Like I was getting a haircut yesterday, and people are talking about the election scenarios and how many seats BJP would get here versus in Andhra and stuff like all that. Same thing I would assume is what teenagers are probably hooked to when it comes to music and culture and other things. And similarly, probably for some other demographic who would probably have some interest and they come together on this. So would you say in a way that maybe offline or social gatherings and interactions and conversations helps news, or they both feed off each other? And maybe over the last 5 to 10 years, a little bit of that's reduced because more people devices. There's still enough of more of raging conversations. I remember back when we were younger, probably 10 years back in the last elections probably, we were having a lot of debates on the left versus right.
Very spicy groups.
And I think at that time, hard left. Again, I was not 25, so probably that's why. Like that Churchill.
Another podcast. This is another podcast.
Yeah, this is another podcast. But maybe the similarities between the two also, right? Like each of them feed off behavior on different instances or different stages of a day or a life, then feeds off into other consumption habits too. Like this is simple, right? I think my passion for sport grew between the age of 12 to maybe 15, 16 because it created a tribalistic environment in school. You were part of that, and there were groups, right? There were people who supported Liverpool, and there was people who supported Chelsea and Man United. Yeah, so you tend to come together as tribes, and that becomes sort of your identity and the need to debate in battle. And I think that was my reason for sort of falling in love with Man United even more than probably just my love for football. So I think if that is if you're feeding that, then I think news has. I mean, that's sort of what news is doing, I would say. If you look at primetime shows, today it's heavily divided between left and right. I think globally, I think that's the pattern. There's a lot of red and blue that they say, right? So, and that's because I think it's feeding off and it's creating that same tribalistic mentality.
I've got a slightly different view on this when it comes to politics. I think what's happening in politics is more about this dichotomy that's being built, and it's probably not a good dichotomy. It's really not how people actually are split. But when you take a side on any issue...
But it's good for business, I would say, maybe.
For the newsstands?
Yeah.
Debatable. I would say, I want to put another perspective on it. What you said is that news and conversations between people feed off each other, right? I think ideally they should feed off each other. But one very good sign that the news is no longer connected to people is that this disconnect may be there. So I just want to give an example, but who are opinion column writers, right? 20 years ago, let's say, so pre-internet, so you're talking with your friends, you both know the news, and now you want informed perspectives on the news. That's when you switch from reading the news to reading opinion pieces. So there's a whole page of the newspaper which is just for op-eds. And the idea from the newspaper's point of view is we will put all kinds of perspectives here. And it was a very common thing for the real debate of what is a society is ideally supposed to happen in those pages. Because before social media, that was the platform, right? That was that was when information was I would say gatekept a little because it was not easy for ordinary citizens to get their voices on that page. But let's say you get an idea going online today of a left versus right debate. 20, 30 years ago, you would get that from opening a newspaper.
Right.
And if you want to go deeper, 20, 30 years ago, you'd open a newspaper and be like, okay, this is what the daily news covers. Let me go deeper. Let me read what a weekly magazine says. You would read what the weekly magazine take is, which is what Economist does.
Right.
And then you want even deeper. Then you read what monthly magazines say,
right.
And that is the way that newspapers used to see this idea of different debates playing out and stuff happening.
Right.
Now today, I can very confidently say most young people are not reading newspapers unless they're UPSC aspirants.
Right.
Or weekly magazines or so on.
True.
But the magazines and stuff are still in that ecosystem of I will have my op-ed guy write this and next week another op-ed guy writes this. And if you go and talk to young people, they won't know who either of these guys are.
Right.
They're probably very big in news industry, but they're not big amongst the people. So what I feel has happened now is journalism has been cut out as a middleman here. People are having their own debates on social media. They're their own moderators, or rather the platform is the moderator. The problem I feel is I do not think that a lot of news brands are bothering to understand what people actually think anymore. Because going back to politics now, you mentioned it's good for them, right? When you play one side, you put a story that's, one side's going to like, you're going to get their traffic, you're going to get their clicks. And if you're advertiser driven, you need the clicks to get the ads. When you play the other side, you get that side's clicks. In a very ideal scenario, you play both sides, which is what super media publishers in the US do. Like Rupert Murdoch owns papers that are like publications that are left-wing and publications that are right-wing. I think in India, you see a little less of that. Yeah. There's a lot more being one side or the other.
Correct.
But at the same time, I've often felt that even some news brands that are branded as left-wing or right-wing, you can read their debates and see that there's a little bit of both sides. My only problem with talking about politics and this aspect is I don't think it's become, I feel envious when I talk to people about sports or tech because it is a lot less polarized. Right. I can have a discussion with someone who doesn't like Apple or Android and we both understand that this is just tech and gadgets. We're interested in this. Politics has become survivalistic and ideological, and it's very tough to talk to people from, let's say, the other side if there's no shared desire to find information. There's only shared desire, my guy must win, I must look smart with my guy, whoever side you're on. Politics is tricky because politics
become like that, right?
It has always existed.
But it wasn't so prevalent, I think. I remember maybe 8-9 years back, I had a client from the US, and I remember this is when Trump was trying to contest, right? And I wanted to poke and get some insights, like, and he's from Ohio, so I wanted to see what his thoughts were.
Ohio man.
He did not. He basically spoke a lot, and at the end of it, did not give me an idea whether he was red or blue.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, he just, because, and I've heard this a lot, because they, I think, are far more evolved than we are. They would never take stance publicly, because, it was just one of those things that you don't.
It's seen as cringe there, I think, to be too in favor of a politician.
But it's changed.
It has changed a bit, yeah.
So what created that? Because I think that's a global trend. Everywhere it's changed. Is it just because today's generation that's come in maybe is a little more vocal? They wear their heart on the sleeve. Is it that sort of behavior, or is it because something else happened that we sort of don't know what happened?
So I mean, I think we're both kind of clued in on how social media has accelerated this polarization, right? You will have your bubble, and the bubble will keep reinforcing it. Other bubbles will keep reinforcing them.
Until
spaces where they intersect are not super encouraged unless the goal is engagement. But for example, politics, algorithms, if you notice, are not trying to smash left and right together. They're trying to send left content to left people, right content to right people. Because when they smash together, you get death threats, you get murder threats, you get like stuff that the platform starts to get in trouble about. But what I think this is where, maybe less as a journalist, more as someone who touched a little bit of social science. I won't call myself a social scientist, but before we were born, there was the Cold War. And instead of left versus right, it was communism versus capitalism. Everywhere except India. That is the interesting thing. So imagine today, you come from an outside perspective, you're just neutral, you're trying to figure out all sides, let's say, and you see typical left versus right thing, and you think this is a dumb way to approach information. I think if you were India pre the 90s, you would look at the whole world, everything is either you're with the communists or you're with the Americans. And from an Indian perspective, we're like, well, that's dumb. Can we not have like best of both worlds? Can we not be objective? So going back to that, right? If you notice how politics is happening today on these platforms, persuasion techniques, propaganda techniques, this stuff was invented long back. So I personally feel that the former Soviet style of propaganda has a lot of the tactics we're seeing today. Things like whataboutism, right? So if something inconvenience about your side is pointed out about your guys or whatever, instead of addressing that, you would just be like, oh no, what about that guy? And you switch topics. You trigger a sort of instinctual ADHD in the guy. There is like a set of propaganda techniques that the Soviet Union used to document and do as part of their global propaganda stuff. And of course, capitalism has its own set of techniques. And I think what we're seeing out now is, after the Cold War, people forgot that these techniques, are ultimately propaganda techniques. They're meant, the people who write them don't believe what they're saying. They're doing it to convince you or something. I think there was a lull between the 90s and till 2010 where this stuff wasn't really catching people.
Right.
And around 2010, I think when bots became a thing and algorithms became better, propaganda techniques started to really document and get people.
Right.
So imagine, even before ChatGPT, we know that like Russian propaganda in the US, so they were really getting involved in the electoral process. They were getting bots to argue both sides in a comment section. Pre-ChatGPT, you can imagine how good those bots are. And people didn't even know. But by creating this illusion of a both sides argument, the bots are letting one side win, the pro-Russian side. It just quietly lets it happen. So let's say you're the kind of person who doesn't just believe a headline. You scroll down to see the comments and you think, okay, after I see how the battle rages out in the comments, I will form my own independent opinion. You think you're being independent, but really you're just watching two bots duke it out to decide what you think.
Right.
This was pre-ChatGPT. You can imagine now. I think now you could simulate the entirety of political discourse in like 10 minutes with a couple of prompts.
Right.
So I think like a lot of stuff has combined to create where we are now. A lot of it is not new. I think you could take some misinformation experts from the 1960s, put them today, and they'd be like, oh, I recognize that technique. Yeah, Khrushchev did that, or like Stalin did that, and they'd probably be a bit better at seeing through it. What's happening now is just generation, there's a lot of intergenerational learning that's not happening. So sometimes we're repeating mistakes that happened before, I think.
Right. That's interesting. And why is that? Why is that intergenerational learning not getting transferred?
So, you have, I think sometimes, have you heard of that thing about when your product is bad, instead of fixing the product, you change the name? I think that may have happened with social media, right? People think that just because I'm consuming information from the internet, maybe it's better. Just because it's not even from the internet, let's say, because information comes from this circle or this spot, you think that this may be better than some paid media thing that I've read somewhere else. And also, I think generally what we're seeing globally is people have started to really distrust the news. This is also a big disconnect, I feel, because what's happened is everybody will say journalism is gone, journalism is dead, media is this, media is that. But what's happening is they're just getting the same journalism filtered through another source, mostly twisted and then churned to them as if it's the truth. What will happen is one person will come and say, media will never tell you this, but such and such incident happened. Every single time I've heard that line, I've Googled it and I've been like, media did tell you, dude. Like, they actually covered it last week. But it gives you a good podium to say the media didn't cover it.
And that's because there's not enough distribution. So then people who hear it from this source, probably, attribute it to him or her.
Yeah, and you think they invented it. And I think, so this is another thing I think is happening. But like I said, the media was a gatekeeper of debate and discourse before. And that got wiped out by the internet. And it seems to me that the internet favors the middlemen more than the media now. So you can see this all the time. The news brand that breaks a story, and think about this. Most newsrooms now are still obsessed with breaking stories.
Yeah.
I have to be first.
Yeah.
But when you actually look at social media, the first person to cover it is not necessarily the biggest. It's the person 5 levels later, like an Instagram meme page, who just shares it. It's not even a meme at this point. It is just a headline with some text, but it's provocative. Like, they'll add a little spin to it. They get 10 times the engagement. They get all the comments that the news brands wish they got. And it's like, I think the platform, I don't know why this is the case. I think it's because maybe people, if you're consuming memes, right, it's sometimes non-political. It's this dose of happiness and entertainment you get regularly on a day-to-day basis. Those memes pages are a good place to slip in news to you. It's better for you than if you read the news every day, which can be really depressing. Even I try not to do it now. I know it sounds very privileged, but I make sure I get the news regardless. I have just so many news streams coming to me, newsletters, podcasts, such and such. But if I was making it a habit to read news websites and all their coverage every single day, I would go insane. And you've seen me in these groups, like I will genuinely be a
Is it because it affects you, or is it because you think it's an inefficient way of consumption? I'll give you my personal story. Like, I stopped consuming news because I just felt the time it requires you to go through newspaper. I actually used to read the newspaper as a kid because it's a culture. Right? Again, I think I was brought up in a household where you did that, but I would start from the back. So I would look at the headlines, then flip it, start from the sports section, and as I grew older, I would stop at the sports section. I would not go beyond that. I just didn't connect with the rest of it, and maybe the City Digest and stuff like that. Then later, I think something like Inshorts came through, and I found that very efficient. Until shit started coming through. Yeah. Like, there was some stuff that, to be honest, shouldn't be news. To be like, I think there was something about Dipinder Goel recently, Zomato marrying. I'm like, who cares? Like, I'm obsessed on business, and I really care about how Zomato share price is doing, but I really don't give two shits about who's married to or not.
Inshorts, for me, it was the most convenient way for me to consume news when it came. I was so excited. And then it just kept giving me IPL news, and I do not care, dude. Like, I did not care about cricket or sports or IPL, and for some reason the app at the time didn't let me switch off like cricket or sports.
Filter.
I had no choice but to, that's when I got offended.
But I think that's because of the advertising repercussions, right? As a product, you want to cater to as wide an audience as you can, because you can then sell impressions. Because we advertise on Inshorts, like we have a partnership with them. We do a lot of stuff. So I'm always trying to figure what's the reach, what's the click through. Like, I want both for the brands that we advertise on. If not, it's not a viable medium. Because the only reason also why we go into an Inshorts is because you exhaust your primary channels, which is generally Facebook and whatever else. And hence you want to expand upon.
Also, I think it's more their problem than yours, right? Like, it's their incentive to send only news that this reader cares about than to give a person like me IPL stories, let's say. And I think they fixed that, to be fair. This was early on.
So, we have that concept of top of the funnel, middle and bottom. It's basically users that are engaged, right? The most prized users are at the bottom, but then to get to them directly would just mean you're diluting your proposition or your sell. So if I was Inshorts, I would want to expand the top of the funnel as wide as I can.
And then you reach
So that's how it is generally. But the segmentation, for example, of people who follow the IPL on the top of the funnel is very large, right? And as a result, it just spills over and reaches you as well. But the way to fix that would be to create enough stories that even when segmented has a sizable top of the funnel. So then even when it trickles down or even at the top of the funnel, it doesn't seem small because advertisers are obsessed with numbers. That's one of the other problems in our line of work. We really don't care about how many people are reading. It's more about how many people are seeing.
Or buying.
Yeah, right. Buying, of course. But I think primary function of advertising is to solve for the first level, right? Which is who's seeing it. So that's the reason why a lot of these products, even I thought Inshorts was a great product.
It was.
Until then, and I think this started to kick in. I still think it's a great product, but I just think there's a lot of patience you need to consume that. And modern day user, like you spoke about, like me, I don't have the patience. So I say, screw all news. I will be a seeker and figure. And this is my theory. If a news is really important, it'll reach me.
Exactly. It should, right?
Yeah, right. So, and today's, I think, dynamics of all platforms are geared that way. As a result, there's no inclination to go and consume news actively or subscribe to somebody. Even though I used to get Madras Courier's newsletters.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, I had to block it afterwards.
Oh, damn it. I should write those.
No, after that. I think it's after you quit.
It's still, I really love the newsletters.
Yeah. But you know, there's a purest vibe to it. You know that, I don't know if, so this is the other thing with journalists, right? Some of them, like, end of the day, anyone who writes a news is a human being and they have their preferences.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, the preferences, no matter how much you try, will influence your narrative. Now, some newspapers, you look at it or some news channels and then you're like, oh shit, this is just propaganda machine.
Yeah.
And then there's the others you look at and say, it's honest. I don't agree with it. It's coming from the other perspective, but it's honest.
Yeah.
And I felt Madras Courier is a bit like that.
I feel a lot of, I think that's a beautiful place to find. So I struggle to find quality right-wing content a lot of times. They do exist economically. I think there are very good economic papers that cover probably what could be considered a right-wing perspective. And I love consuming that because they're at least trying to be honest and make a case. Like going back to Oxford Union, right? Give me a dude on the other side who's making a damn good case for it. You know, I'll tell you one funny thing about Oxford. Like, I didn't really meet many racist people, but I met one racist dude. And to be honest, I had a damn good conversation with him because, like, he wasn't racist in a sense he's going to call me slurs and, like, not engage with me. No, he's engaging with me and he's giving me his side of things in a slightly funny manner. Like, he was able to make me laugh, which I was like, okay, that's awesome.
What did he say?
I can't get into that.
Okay.
Also, I kind of forgot. My memory of that conversation is a bit vague. I left that with no hatred towards the guy. It was just like, I'm kind of like, that's the kind of discourse I wouldn't
why you're
mind.
racist.
I will totally talk to a person from the other side if they're funny. You know, I talk to anyone, but, you know, it's just more fun if they're funny. But let me get to that actually. It's not just about, there's been this debate in journalism since day one about, is objectivity possible? And the answer usually is kind of no, because everyone has their own biases and stuff that comes out. But, you know, I think there are other ways of looking at it. Have you read Tintin as a kid? Tintin is a journalist. And probably I think why I like journalism. It gave me this idea that you could go and discover these insane stories all over the world, connect with cultures, see different things, have awesome adventures. While the thing with Tintin though is he was part of the story. So he was actively influencing the situations he's in. Whereas ideally a journalist is supposed to just be a scribe. You just write down what's going on or like try to capture. So one of my friends had this beautiful description of journalism. He called it a moving investigation into the shifting landscape of truth. Your path to find out what's happening will make you move. It should. You should not be sitting in one place writing about stuff somewhere else, which I think is what I did a lot of my time. That's why I'm not like a journalist. I'm a cog inside. Like I'm sort of in middle of it. I think like journalism has to be moving. You should be going everywhere the story is taking you. But at the same time, the story today is different from the story tomorrow. It's also changing. What that means is no matter what you do, at best, if you're lucky, you will capture a moment in time truthfully and honestly. If you want to capture reality, I don't think it's possible except for like a god, you know, an omniscient being who sees everything and can then describe that in what will probably be an infinite textbook. All we do is take this in a slice of infinity. And here's the other thing I think people sometimes miss. Journalists, when writing something, have to read all the coverage of it before they write, right? It's a habit, it grows. And that's also why journalists consume information differently, I feel. So I'm used to reading what every other article on the topic has said until I write my own piece. And so they're taking that funnel and then what they actually write, okay, I'm not going to say everything I've read, I'm choosing these bits to say. And the another thing that happens is you put out an article and the readers mostly only engage with the headline. That's the bottom of the funnel. And then they just leave it.
Correct.
journalists don't pick the headlines most of the time.
Right.
It's picked by an editor, someone above them who knows the art of spin and stuff. I used to suck at headlines. Then once AI came, I was like, okay, I'm going to use the AI to figure out better headlines and teach myself how to do headlines. That was actually
working?
Yeah, I think so. Because I genuinely sucked at headlines. I was the worst person in the room for them. And now I think what AI gives me is just a very instant A/B test. It can give me 10 headlines in different styles. And what I do is I
But
just mix
the
and
selection
match.
still comes down to the craft, right? Of knowing what works.
I guess so. You get a hunch after a while.
Right.
Like
But
for
has
me-
it helped you craft better headlines?
Yeah, because this was definitely a skill where I would be telling people like I'm not the best person to do this. I will try. I will always try. But I know that these guys are going to do better. But now I'm more like I have a system which I think will let me explore a wide range of headlines. And basically the picking part is more or less about once you read enough, you know if it's boring, right? You know if I've heard this 1,000 times
Right.
before. So you stop saying stuff like that. Like for me, my personal gripe is headlines that say understanding this or all you need to know about this. I feel like I just see that too many times on the internet. I would try to write something that I've not seen before that grabs your attention. Going back to it, Jeremy Clarkson. Maybe you don't agree with his
An
takes on...
incredible fucking journalist.
Exactly. But, if you were a car guy, you might not agree with some of his takes.
Yeah.
He's done very controversial stuff about
Yeah,
how
yeah.
they reviewed Tesla, for example, right? They faked
Insane.
the thing.
Of course, I know.
stuff.
I've seen that.
But
It's a great
what?
episode. It's great.
It's
It's
beautiful
great fucking
content.
TV.
It's great TV. And at the end of the day, I think that's an interesting thing about Clarkson. People who hate him will still enjoy watching him.
Yeah.
And the guy has versatility. So, okay, he's an auto reporter. One day he just starts a show where he's a farmer.
Yeah.
It's called Clarkson's Farm.
Incredible
it is
show.
amazing. My dad actually is into farming. I made him watch a bit of that also. I think So also I don't know if this is bouncing off tomorrow, but my dad used to always tell me when they were sending a journalist to cover something, it's often better to send the person who doesn't know the topic at all.
Because you would cover it like a novice.
Yeah.
And that's more relatable to the reader.
Exactly. And also he gets that, I would say, academic humility that, man, I don't know about this. I need to find like great people, experts. I need to understand this topic. A person who thinks they know about a subject, and I think this is where you see a lot of bad journalism, will just walk in saying, I know what, yeah, this is a very typical thing. I've seen this 20 years ago. It's obviously the same thing that's happening now. They'll walk away and go and file their copy. And you see this all the time. Jeremy Clarkson getting into farming is exactly that. You take like a fish out of water. It turns out that not only do you get great content, you actually get great journalism. Because in Clarkson's Farm, this is a slightly conservative dude, right? They're usually the kind of people who are against climate change,
Right.
environment and stuff. When he started becoming a farmer, he realized that, dude, this stuff is affecting the soil right now. Like today we are seeing the effects of climate change. He accidentally found out. And I think that was a great example of journalism. It's how it should be. You shouldn't be taking people who already agree with a certain thing and saying cover this, and then you write something and give it to people who already pre-agree with what you're going to write, right? There's no point doing stories where you're not changing minds. I feel it's good to make intersections and conversations happen. So that's where the intersection comes. Clarkson, I wouldn't call him a journalist. I would call him an entertainer, a storyteller, a content creator. But what we're seeing in this new world is everyone has to be one of these things.
So on that note, so we touched upon this before the start of this podcast as well. Do you believe every content is or everybody is in the content game, whether you are a journalist or no? And as a result, your competition lines are blurred.
Exactly. I do agree with it, but I want to preface it by saying a lot of people take a negative reaction to the word content.
Right.
They have a picture of what content means in their head.
Right.
And I would say try to overcome that, because it's very, in media studies, there's something called, there's a famous line by this theorist called Marshall McLuhan, which is medium is the message. And what it essentially was
I
talking
heard that
about,
recently in one of the meetings, brand meetings, by the way.
Oh yeah, they always get into it. It means like, if you're going to advertise in a certain newspaper, if that newspaper has a bias, you now acquire that bias, right?
Yeah.
Like you are going to be in that ball with them.
It is actually true, to be very honest. This is what I was speaking to you about earlier also, right? There are some best practices for success when you disseminate content.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is a purist will not adhere to it because it doesn't match his or her personal values and system. And on the other hand, there would be people who do anything for that.
Yeah.
Because you essentially just want success and whatever that means by that virtue of that distribution. So it's common across, by the way, not just probably in journalism.
It's everywhere, right? The thing with calling stuff, so everything is content, I think, is just a way of humbling yourself also.
Yeah.
Recognize that if there's an amazing Netflix production, right, the best TV possible, it took hundreds of people years to make it, that's going to consume 1 hour of your reader's time, and your reader has time to read your news in the 2-3 hours they have free in the day. 1 hour is going to go to Netflix. You have to make it's not just that you did your reporting and did your story, you've got to reach them in a way that makes it worth them not watching Netflix. It should make it worth them not playing PUBG for half an hour. There are a million things the reader can do besides read your stories. So you better make it interesting.
Right.
Now that's tricky because again, people will think, oh, that means I have to make clickbait. I have to do a Mr. Beast thumbnail video and stuff like that. And no, I don't think it's just that. I think you should learn from YouTubers and filmmakers actually how to take a normal boring topic and make it interesting and make it fun. I think a good journalist should never take a story and be like, this is boring. There is always something interesting to be said. It's just the art of finding that out and telling your readers. That's when your readers start to like you also, because they'll realize, hey, you made me give a damn about this topic I actually don't care about. I think Clarkson may have accidentally made a lot of people environmentalists who a target audience probably weren't environmentalists, right? You're watching this car show all about low mileage petrol supercars and stuff, and you're watching it because he's charismatic and a great storyteller. You watch him get into a farm, get his legs and feet dirty, and suddenly he realizes, damn, climate change is going to reduce my crops this year. You learn something unwillingly. And that was at once great content and informative content. So I think, and this is where I think the industry has yet to sort of catch up, a lot of news is still packaged the way it has always been. And
but that's just, creatures of the habit, right?
Creature of habit, but also like news has always been very results oriented, right? So newspapers would talk about circulations. You had all these metrics for eyeballs and stuff like that. Metrics you're still using today, even though they may not be the case, right? If you're assuming that a newspaper or something lying in a house is going to get read by 4 people, not just the one person who reads it, I do not think that's true anymore. But that's an old metric that still comes.
By the way, it's not only is it an old metric, it is still the metric of measurement of ad value in the offline world. In print publication, your ad rates and slots are still decided by that. Exactly. And it's a joke, by the way, because, for example, assume you want to do like the government. Let's take the government's example, right? DAVP, the rate system, Department of Audio Visual Programming. I think that's what it's called. So they set the advertising rates, parameters or the slabs that the government will advertise on, for example. So if tomorrow the Department of Health or Government of Karnataka or Government of India wants to take an ad out on the Hindu or the Times of India, that's the measurement system. Okay. It's a joke. I'll tell you why. The digital advertising rate that's been put forward, right? For if I was to take an ad out on say a Daily Hunt or even a Facebook for that matter, because it is an offline online publication. The rate of and we measure this on something called a CPM. A CPM is a cost per mile, which is 1,000 impressions. If 1,000 times your ad has been seen by the same people or otherwise,
how much you paid for
it's how much you pay for it. So the government has a rate that is fixed at 35. Okay, so they will only advertise on a slot that is already pre-charged or is preset at 35 CPM fixed. So if you charge more and if you have more eyeballs that you can gather, they will not buy it from you. Basically, that's just the rule for it. Print is at 150. That's a joke. Right? Because the circulation numbers of what print can, and now this is the old habit because of whatever reason, the way things were done, because of the fact that there's a gatekeeper for print and there's still validation and all that's been attributed to it. I don't know when this will change, because if the government's thinking that way, it's only natural that even the journalists think that way, right? I think there's more importance given to print than probably to digital.
No. It's just that print in journalism probably has acquired a slight reverence, right? So people who are doing print journalism generally are doing deeper stories, slightly more senior than the people doing digital. Not always. And I think if we talk about news brands that most people are reading right now, they're digital first. They don't even have a print wing. It's a weird mix of tradition and old stuff and things. If you ask young journalists working in the field, I don't think they'd agree.
Probably.
With it.
I think young generation is very different.
But I also, just going back to that, like I said, these might be the metrics, right? So we're talking about an industry that is used to dealing with metrics. It just happens that you've picked an outdated metric for today. I think there is a problem in journalism where you're not understanding, you don't actually know how and when and where your reader is reading you. We no longer know this stuff and we're not really finding out. And I think that's like interesting, because it advertises. I don't know. And I'll put it another way, but there are a million companies, right? And companies have problems. So there's this whole industry called consulting, which will come and solve their problems, right? Like, and ideally the consultants are packed with people who should know about different aspects of this problem. You come to them, you give the gyan, you take the paycheck, you go. I don't know whether it works or not. I assume it works because it's such a big business. I don't think journalism has tried that too much, because we really do see this absence of expertise within the field of how does content work? How do readers consume Mr. Beast readers? At what point in the day does a Mr. Beast
But this is
viewer
basic,
want?
in all honesty. Because like you go to any e-commerce website, they're tracking your cursor movements on the platform from
Exactly.
the minute that you're there. And there's heat maps, and then they're looking at all kinds of data. For example, where you're consuming, which source you're coming from. It's crazy what data gives you. I'm surprised that journalism isn't using any of that.
So
I'm sure there's some element of that deployed, right?
a little bit. I mean, I've seen some data sometime. I mean, we know what time of the day readers
Okay.
are most active, let's say. And we can tell where they're coming from. We know what types of stories they're coming from. But honestly, Saanand, that doesn't tell me who the reader is. Like, who is this person?
That's
But at the
that's
same
breach of
time,
privacy, to be honest, if you did.
But it seems the advertisers and the algorithms know it. So I would put it this way. I think the platforms don't particularly care about showing you information. They care about making sure that if you're getting an ad, it should be something worth your time. So for me personally, I think I actually buy 3 out of 10 products of ads that are shown to me. I don't know if it's a high ratio for most people. It probably is for
quite
me.
high.
But I think it speaks to the quality of targeting that I get. They actually show me products that I don't find elsewhere, that are usually, let's say, independent, new ideas, cool stuff that I like, in the intersection of things that I like. This algorithm knows me so well, that means. If that algorithm chose to give me news, I think it would give me the kind of stories I would love to have. But it doesn't have an incentive to do that, right?
Sure. Okay, so I mean, there's another question I have. I have 2-part question. One is that you said that there's not as much data. So, is it a cultural problem of that data not trickling down to the writer, or because I see that a lot in the creative industry, in advertising at least, that a lot of creative professionals are not. They don't have the habit of reading data. As a function of which they go about ignoring it and giving it less importance. And as a result, they're not able to produce what is most, again, same problem we have, which is the audience wants something, but then the audience has changed so much in a decade that if somebody was in the peak of their powers 10 years ago in advertising, they're almost redundant now because they don't understand their audience and behavior anymore. And that's because you haven't changed your times. You haven't, taken the effort to sort of read data consistently and see how that's changed. Because if you ask me personally, I mean, one thing I do here is like, I don't get involved in the work that we do for our clients, but I make it a point to read every month's report that is internally circulated. And whatever scale that might be, it gives me some level of insight. Now, that's a habit. If you don't have it, it's going to be very hard to inculcate. And as a result of which, even if you have data, like assume you will never get data of who's reading your articles.
Yeah.
That's impossible. That's private. That's stalking. Honestly, you don't want to do that. But it will give you an understanding that 18 to 24 demographic from tier 1 cities who have, say, Windows desktop version are consuming your news between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. for example. You could get information like that.
I get that, but it's not useful. I think when we're talking about news, right?
You want psychographic data.
I'm not sure what I want. I think I'm being a bit petulant. I just okay. I'll put it another way. I think I've really noticed this with no exceptions. The way everybody I've seen in this industry consumes news themselves is so different from the news they're producing. That's interesting to me. There's just this like okay, you are a particular time in office which is just quiet enough that you want to learn about the world and no one's talking to you. You're going to open your system. And most people are traumatized by the news at this point, especially journalists, because dealing with this every day gets to you. So you're not going to go straight to a news website. You'll open your inbox where you've carefully curated a few newsletters from people you trust and like, and you read that, and you've set aside, let's say this time, you come and meet Saanand after work and you have a conversation and both your shared interests get discussed privately in a WhatsApp group. And I'll give a third example, which is maybe a friend who is the kind who does this, shares an article they think you like. In these 3 cases, does the news source know that you've done these things? Does the brand know that I do this newsletter reading at this time because of this? I have a friend called Saanand and we both talk about only this. I'm not saying to get in, like, I'm not saying
you could maybe if you could track the open rates on your newsletter, and the time frames under which, and then you already have the information of the user captured, because when they fill in the newsletter, you are capturing a bunch of the information. Like a bunch of, when I say generic information, gender, city, location,
Go deeper. That newsletter, right? Let's say you want to know something. I have a friend who happens to write a newsletter exactly what you want to know. How do you find him? Because it turns out most of the times you get a newsletter, was it recommended? Was it shown on Twitter? Let's say this dude has only 300 followers, but he's exactly what you need to know. The algorithm is not really pushing him to you.
It won't. Partly because I think all the social media algorithms today do not have any incentive to sort of give you organic reach.
Yeah.
So the only way you're gonna overcome that is if you put money behind your content on platforms and promote it. Like that's the only way. There's no other way you're gonna grow. I'll give you a simple example. I've been doing this podcast for a year. I've had more growth in the last 2 weeks than I've had for a year. Because the first year, my ego was so big, I said, I'll just put it out there. I don't want to promote it. Let's see what comes out of it. And then for the last 2 weeks, we've been spending like $500 on every piece of video that we do and just promote it just to see what it is. The difference is incredible, right? It's like 200x the results. So I think the platforms a long time ago took this route, saying that, and I think this was in 2017. I remember, this is a very good insight. I remember in 2014, I think Facebook put out its first ever message saying we're going to limit the 100% organic reach that you have. For example, I remember, like if you remember early days of Facebook, some guy in class would like some post or be friends with somebody, and that notification would find its way to our feed. Over time, they realized we have no interest in knowing that shit, right? Like on Instagram now, you can't even see what the people you follow are doing. Before you could do that also.
I hated that.
Yeah, right? Exactly. So they're filtering that out. And I remember in 2014, they said we will start reducing this organic reach. And it is because we were trying to curate the feed. The reality was we were trying to turn on the ad product.
Yeah.
In 2017, they took a hard call, say we will kill organic reach. Because one of the things that happened on Facebook was almost 2 of every 3 interactions that people had on Facebook was changing from a peer-to-peer conversation to a peer-to-publisher to peer conversation, which means I would go find some page that's putting content. I would either share that with you or I would tag you in the comment section for you to look at it together and a bunch of friends. And we would only do that. And that became the behavior for a long period of time.
So sharing a story is a peer-to-publisher, you would say? Like on a Facebook, Instagram stories.
If you do it in DMs, it's fine.
No, you post your Insta stories to only your followers and you're a private account.
But that's still engagement at a base level just to all your followers. That doesn't come under this category. This is pre-stories. This is pre-DMs, I think. Or maybe DMs is still there. But that was the behavior on Facebook at least. Yeah. And that wasn't benefiting anybody but the publishers. They were making money. BuzzFeed, they grew so much, right? If you remember in the mid-2010s on the back of this.
Oh, but here's the thing. You're looking at BuzzFeed as a publisher. I'm seeing I think every page on Instagram can be seen as a publisher.
It is. They are a publisher. So I believe in that. Yeah, it's very funny. I in 2014, I was 14 or 15, I think, early 15, late 14, I was researching on social media because I was just curious at that time. And in 15, I remember we got this gig from this social media analytics firm who wanted articles written on the Cricket World Cup. But they wanted us to use their tool, mine out unique insight, and then use that insight to write an article.
Oh, like the angle is predetermined.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I got the business in, and then there was Adi who was working with us back then, was a writer who was doing it. I also chipped in to write 3 or 4 articles because there was so much volume that we were required to do. And we were getting paid, I think, $1,000 an article. So we were like, okay, let's see how much we can do, and then we'll whatever, right? So I did that for a while, and I was researching, and I found this, I think South by Southwest was one of those forums, and there was Bleacher Report, and there were a bunch of other publications, and there was also Gary Vee in that panel. And he did this funny thing. He was sitting on a podium, and he had this bottle in hand, and he said the exact same thing. He opened the bottle and he threw it, like from the panel, and said, "This cap is in the media business." And to me, that was actually revolutionary because nobody thought that way. But that's actually a reality. Every single page, every single profile on any single social media platform actually has no difference from a journalist or a publication,
Yeah.
because these are all platforms where you publish content,
Yeah.
and that's what a newspaper did too, or a TV channel does too. So if I was to start a media channel today or a media organization, I would only focus on Instagram for distribution, maybe Twitter for fast-paced content. Also, I think it lets you do spaces and other stuff.
Yeah.
And then YouTube to summarize and do short-form video content that gets you the reach.
So
If you want distribution.
Totally. And I think that's a wise thing to do today. But the reality is it's the same as starting a YouTube channel or starting a business, right? Let's ballpark it. 8 out of 10 people are going to fail.
Of course.
And it's brutal because, you're competing with everybody on earth. I'm not too keen on the aspect. So I think with news in particular, I don't believe boosting makes sense here.
Why?
I think what we're seeing is since 2017, there's been an explosion in Substack, right? Private newsletters. You can monetize your Substack. And it turns out that even for a budding news brand, getting your first 1,000 paying subscribers goes a very long way.
Yeah.
That's what cements you in the game
100%.
in a way that I think even news brands right now, let's say ones that are relying on advertising to pay the bills, they may not know if they're going to get their next paycheck 3 months from now because the industry is so chaotic and it's collapsing in a lot of places. In a lot of places it's not, in a lot of places it is. So this Substack wave, right, was purely organic. You don't boost Substacks. They're largely word of mouth, and it's largely, I think, Twitter based. Like you follow a bunch of people who you consider experts, and eventually you find out that the experts all read this one newsletter. You want to read it too, right? I'll give you another example. Have you seen The Big Short?
Yeah.
There's a lot of credit given to people like, what is his name, Michael Berry and stuff for spotting the economic crisis.
Yeah.
But then I read a very small mention one day that one of the dudes who found out about this first, that, the real estate, this is happening in real estate and it's all going to crash, read it in a newsletter called, I think, Grant's Observer. And I look up that newsletter and it's something, I think it's by a hedge fund or something. Forgive me, I'm a little clueless on finance. Right. But I find out it's a very high quality newsletter with what I would call alpha content, like brand new, original source, highly researched content. Now, me knowing that someone like, say, Michael Berry is reading that newsletter and that's what gave him the thesis to make these billions of dollars, right, tells me that I should subscribe to that newsletter. I think on a similar level, we have seen newsletters explode across the world on this principle. A few high quality people, let's say that I like this newsletter, and those people are reached organically through pain and blood and sweat, and these guys will have, let's say, 20 subscribers in the beginning. They turn it to 1,000 high quality people. That blows up, and by blows up, I mean that maybe a great newsletter gets 10,000 or 50,000 max. You really don't need numbers here. You want people who actually just read you. And I think 1,000 to 10,000 readers is good enough for you to write what you want to write, which in journalism, I think is the highest level of freedom you can reach.
Right.
You can, let's take somebody who's an anchor in the biggest news channel on earth. They can't say what they want to say. It's a kind of privilege that very few journalists would ever reach in their lives unless they became super famous to the point where they don't care. Like, say, Jeremy Clarkson, who can almost write and say what he wants to write because he is his own publisher at this point. He writes a book, the publisher wants their book with him, not the other way around. So likewise, I feel like this organic level of growth, right, is what allows journalism to be at its best. Independent, supporting random dudes. I don't want people who have just been in the industry and built network and privilege and stuff like to be it. I think if an 18-year-old has great ideas, they should be able to be a journalist with a reach. I really feel that this organic approach is ideal, but the platforms are not designed for it. So this is where I feel we're reaching a point where it's not enough to have Instagram, Facebook and Twitter and Gmail as moderators of information. And of course, I don't agree that the existing network of print brands is enough either. I think what we're missing right now is what used to be magazine readers before, which is you trust high value publications to give you niche content in the niche you care about. That space has been wiped out because young people really don't go buy magazines. Yeah. They probably will read it, but where are you going to find it? Like half
online
the time
versions of it?
Online, but it's not a habit to go and seek it out.
I mean, that's the same with books too, right?
Same with books, but books somehow survived. And again, magazines have survived. They're still in there. It's just that I don't think they're reaching new audiences.
Fair. So just dialing back a couple of steps, right? I'll tell you why I'm so bullish on paid. I think the user does not care, right? If I'm on Instagram or Facebook or wherever it is, and if something comes my way, we are beyond that point of whether this came my way because it's sponsored versus it is organic.
Oh wait, but maybe we're coming from different places here. When I think of these paid campaigns, what I'm usually noticing is that you give Instagram this stuff. They're just throwing fake likes and fake bots and fake comments at us. Right?
See,
it doesn't seem like human beings are real.
I'll tell you what. So this is the problem a lot of people make. I think surface level metrics of likes, engagement are platform metrics. Treat them as they are, right? And that gives you a sense of first level data. But if you are in journalism business, if you're in the publication business, what your real metric should be, how many people are you taking from that platform or to your platform, your publication page, and what's the level of engagement you're getting there? Are they converting? Now, the problem that a lot of them face is that Meta as a platform does not like when you take a user away, right? And it's the same for everybody. Their business hinges on that. So they just tend to shadow ban you, or they just tend to not promote you. I remember for a while, Twitter tried that, if you remember. It said the other external links won't work. And then Mr. Beast jumped in and said something. And then I think Elon switched it back. I think, so you need, what do you say? I think Meta is not that drastic, but I think they help that. Now the point is, that would be a good mechanism. What's your per session average time spent by a user on your website, for example?
But I hope someone watching this podcast may have had more experience in this than I do. I think that number for most news brands would be 0. At least that's what I've seen. It actually doesn't translate.
Into what? A paying customer?
Into sometimes even a click. But let's say even many levels beyond a paying customer.
Possible, right?
Something seems off about news, right? When it's pushed this way. Something is
I'll tell you where I disagree with that. The Athletic did this. The Athletic
I used
reached
to see their
me
sponsored
through
post,
sponsored post. It still does. I would go onto the page, they would ask me to pay £1 or €1 or something, and then I would be like, no, I don't want to do it. I'd leave. But a lot of my friends do. They send some articles through sometimes. A couple of them are free sometimes here and there, and you tend to read it. They're long, but they're great. I can live without it. This is my point of view. I think I have enough acumen to put information together and make a mental image. Some of them don't. And some of them genuinely enjoy reading. Having said that, I think coming back to the point, there's no difference, to be honest. To a user, when they receive a piece of news, it's about whether I want to consume it or not. And often at times when they don't want to consume it, it's because it's been packaged poorly.
So just a question here. Even I have gotten that Athletic sponsored ad. Probably the only example I can think of from a news brand doing this. I don't know, maybe are they the only ones who figured it out, or
because I think it's a no-brainer.
I feel I'll tell you why. Done it though, right?
I'll tell you why. I think for the longest time, publications have been at war with Meta. Unnecessarily. And I don't understand why. Just use the platform, just put money behind it, circulate it. You will get more returns if you have value. It's also it's a litmus test. Because if you put money behind and if you still can't get your users, then there's something fundamentally wrong with your publication or the way you're communicating.
I think we're getting closer to the truth here.
Yeah, I think that's a reality. So if you can do that, then it's a no-brainer. Like, I always believed so.
I'll throw a hunch, maybe a little bit about the industry here, but I think many big brands have and have been doing this, and the amounts could be in crores also, like what they're willing to spend giving to these publications. And it's sunk cost because a lot of times you see that I don't get anything from this. I don't get the readers I want. I get this brief spike in views, and then the next day when I stop these campaigns, it's gone.
Of course.
But again,
but that's a distribution.
Even when the campaigns are running, I'm not getting high quality readers. And again, a very big doubt is most of the time these are very clearly bots.
But see, that's always going to be the case. You can't help it, because I feel look at it like TV, right? There's a lot of people watching TV, lot more than any other format of any other medium. How many of them are glued in versus how many of them are just scrolling through?
Yeah.
And that's always going to be the case. With volume comes that problem. And which is why you need metrics that measure your level 1, 2, 3, third being the conversion, right? Where they're willing to either subscribe to a newsletter or the pay for a thing.
I still have a doubt here. I mean, I'd love to check this with you later. Do this for a news brand. Tell me how many. I feel like when you're doing ads, right, you can probably reach a real human being. I'm very curious about when you do this for news, are you actually showing it to human beings? Because I think it's being shown to bots. They're the only example I can think of.
But what's a bot? Tell me, how do you categorize a bot?
It's like if you're doing English content and you're seeing that like the likes is this dude very like some remote part of India, never posts in English, never shares in English.
But he consumes English content maybe.
Doesn't seem like it. All he
Why
seems
not?
to have done is
Because
like,
it's aspirational, right?
no, I mean,
All products that are shoved to him, not shoved, but shown to him.
so this is the doubt part. I'm talking about the likes I've seen on these boosted
But there's no way to
posts.
confirm it, to be very honest.
No way to confirm, but it seems fairly certain that this dude has not consumed the product. He might be part of a click farm.
He may not be an ideal customer, but that doesn't mean that he can't consume the communication that you put out there.
Totally. But I'm going further to say that it looks like a lot of these guys are bots. Let's say one post, some 2-3 followers, no real sense of like being a normal person posting. You know like what bots look like on social, right? So by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this, on Swiggy, you can now buy Instagram likes and followers.
On Swiggy, as in?
There's Swiggy Minis has started, right?
Yeah.
So they connect you with random small businesses.
Yeah.
One of the top small businesses in like electronics services is this thing that'll just let you buy likes and buy followers. I need
to check it out. I'm going to do
curious that I did it on an alt account because I'm like, screw it, ban this account because it's obviously a violation, just to see if it works. Because I'm just like, can you do this on Swiggy? You know, the likes I got, it was like these guys have made profiles of rural Indians in all parts of India, and some of them have a couple of real looking photos, and the name of the profile is in Russian. So you've got this like very Ramraj like character, okay? And in Russian, his name is Anatolia Dostovsky. Like literally in Russian, they didn't change that for some reason. Some of these things are Russian tech. I think Russian click farms are making this stuff.
See, I mean, it's very much possible, right? Like, I'm not saying that the bots don't exist, but if you spend enough time on platform, you will have the ability to distinguish between the two. Like, we're talking about a podcaster before this, right? The guy whose show I was on.
That's what I mean. I've never seen real
So he
users.
went from having 5,000 followers to 14,000 followers overnight. Without any ads being run, without any new content being published. Highly unlikely that kind of a reach and visibility would happen. But it did. Now, the point is, you will get a sudden influx and you have to see how long you sustain it. So he had that for about 3 months and then it just one random day dropped by 4,000. So it's probably some glitch there, right? And that's possible. There are a lot of these bot accounts, and from time to time, Meta and Google and all of them make efforts to clean up the platform. Yeah. So if your account is suspicious of such behavior, they would ban you and they will take you out. So over time, that does get filtered. But yes, I mean, it is a problem. But I think writing off all efforts of distribution saying these are all bots, I think is also foolish, because go around asking, can you find somebody today that's not on social media?
Yeah, you can't, right?
Exactly, right? So just think of the possibilities. And a lot of people are lurkers. It's a term that we use. They don't really do much on the platform other than just randomly scroll through and consume. And to be very honest, 90% of population on social media are lurkers. Yeah. And they do exhibit bot-like features. They don't comment, they don't post, they don't like interact.
And maybe they have a username like Yuri12345 something.
I know tons of people who work here who don't like social media but are on it because of the work they have to do, and they don't even have a profile picture. They have a random name and they follow like 3 people, 2 people, but they're on it consuming, and all their interactions are in groups, inside DMs and stuff like that. So they don't even exhibit anything to the outside world. So there's tons of people that way.
Can I make a crazy thesis though?
Yeah.
Have you worked with news brands?
Besides
Inshorts, I think.
No, I mean, we have advertised on it.
Advertised on them, okay.
Yeah, but we might soon work with one. So yeah, maybe.
I wonder what you would think if you audited a typical big news brand. Because I have a feeling you might see stuff that scares you.
Like?
Engagement numbers, the quality of engagement, the quality of results, like everything we're talking about here. I don't doubt that this works for advertisers and product people, but I have a feeling that news has screwed it up so badly now that it might be unfixable. You mentioned that platforms shadow banned them, right? There was a wave, let's say around 2016 or 17, when a lot of Indian news brands and stuff, I think suddenly, blew up on Facebook, blew up in the sense that suddenly they got lakhs of followers, lakhs of stuff. Now, the thing that these platforms hate, this is my understanding, is that you buy bots and like a few days the bots are doing their job, and then therefore the bots stop doing anything. From the platform's point of view, they don't think that the bots stop working. They think you started to suck, dude. Like, you really must suck if 4 lakh people just stop caring about you. Maybe you got cancelled. Maybe you did something wrong. So they penalize you.
Like as a journalist?
No, as a platform, as a page.
Right.
And now you've got a follower count.
Who employed these or who deployed these bots in the first place?
The brands. The brands and more than the brands.
You
I
mean
think
by the publisher, or you mean like some brand that's sponsoring something?
the people running the accounts. There was a wave, I think, when people just started to buy bots to pad the numbers up and stuff.
Right. So you mean like, hypothetically speaking, a Times of India would have a page,
Yeah.
and then they would employ bots to bump up the views.
I don't know if they've done it, but I think there
But
was
that's a bad
phase.
strategy. Like most, see, I'm not saying that they like. I know publishers, right? These aggregators of publishers, and a lot of these big media agencies use them. When you run a campaign and you're not able to hit the numbers that you need to hit, you make this call.
You open Swiggy.
Yeah, or that. And then these folks would come in, and then they would basically help distribute you through obscure sources,
Yeah.
where you would get bump up on the, again, first level numbers,
Yeah.
right? Reach, clicks.
Exactly. It's
But
a huge
then
industry.
As you go down into the funnel, you don't get that. But sure, that's there, and there are people offering that service. But the problem is, it's a tough business to run,
Yeah.
because these platforms keep penalizing
I think
you.
you're saying it's a bad idea.
Of course.
What if I told you this whole industry might be the
Possible.
kind that makes bad ideas again and again and again? But unlike, so tell you what,
So,
if you were talking to a YouTuber or an independent creator, it's death for them if they did this, right?
Yeah.
You're finished. Because if your page reaches this 1 lakh and now these bots are dead, you're not going to get them back ever again. And now you actually have only 10 people following. Every day the platform punishes you for having such low engagement. Your only solution is to kill the page, right? You don't have an option, or manually remove all the
and
bots.
then you start again. But see, that's the point, right? I'm sure even Mr. Beast has a lot of bots following him. It's a function of fame. The way to circumvent that is to use a level of human referral system. Like, for example,
Oh, wait, to go back. He would want to circumvent that, right? He has an incentive
of
not
course,
to.
but you can't.
Let me switch it about, but I'm saying that independent creators will not let this situation continue, right?
But how?
Let's say there's,
I'm saying
like, you can remove it.
They will consciously, yeah, sure. Like, for
It's their
example,
only revenue stream.
yeah, but if you have 1 million followers, assume opening your Instagram, looking at everyone that's following you one by one, going through it's not scalable. It's just not doable, right?
It's not doable.
Yeah,
but my
so-
point is, it's kind of death. You would avoid being in that situation. But let me go back to this. They have incentives and reasons, A, not to get in the situation, B, to fix the situation.
course.
What's with big media or media brands is you already have revenue streams that have been decided years ago. You have
Exactly.
deals with, say, print
You're
ads and
selling
stuff.
futures.
So you are not treating your social media as accountably as even the smallest influencer.
Right.
And I think that's created a perfect storm when you start going to CNN and the biggest brands on earth, news brands, and look at their average numbers. Something's off, right? There's no way you're getting such few views. There's no way Times of India, a typical video, right, on YouTube, sometimes it's just 100 views or 200 views. There is no way it can be.
That's because I think this goes back to that old conversation that we had of width versus depth, right?
Yeah.
You will always find easy viewers for width than depth. Now that also comes down to what are you optimizing for.
Yeah.
It's tough for an athletic, for example, because that's a reference here, to have enough views and numbers on any of these social media platforms.
Yeah.
The true customers, like you said, for the ones that matter to athletic are the ones who are inside athletics newsletter or the public
Power readers,
website,
let's
and then
say,
the ones who are consuming it there. It's hard the other way to attract because
Yeah.
it's not built for it. On the other hand, if a Faye D'Souza, for that matter, puts out a carousel of 3 slides with information, that'll blow up.
Faye
Now-
D'Souza's page, right? What is her ratio of bangers to like 10 likes? There's nothing with 10 likes.
That's because I'll tell you why that is. She caters to an audience who only consume news from her.
Yeah.
And as a result of which, first time you get a piece of news and then you just tend to like it or you comment, whatever. And it's looked at little differently because again, like you said, there's not enough trust in big publications. People now tend to trust individuals more. And I think, is she the flag bearer among Indian independent
Yeah,
journalists? Easily, right? Great. So I think she's broken through and she's become the first. Now that's the start. There will be more who come through.
More like I would say she's the first journalist to really kill it on Instagram from India.
You know, if Arnab didn't have his channel,
He's nobody, yeah.
He would be the same
Yeah,
for
he
a
would
different
have- yeah.
demographic on
Yeah,
Instagram
yeah.
for that matter, or YouTube or wherever else.
He's someone who understands the
Yeah.
medium. I don't doubt he would
Ben
have done the
Shapiro.
same thing. But I put it another way, I do think a lot more people are aware of what Faye is saying. I mean, maybe from our generation than what Arnab is saying. because we're not a TV watching audience. You don't have this primetime TV thing.
That's for a different generation, different demographic, totally. And different.
The person who kills it on Instagram, I also think that Faye probably, I personally think she did it organically, because I noticed a lot of people, influencers in different fields, right, of their own volition would be posting her stories. They would be amplifying her stories.
Right.
You don't have to pay them to do it. They just do it. And it's the perfect, what's the opposite of a perfect storm? It's the perfect honey avalanche for like organic growth. When other big influencers, for no reason other than they like your content, all promote you at the same time, because news is timely.
Right.
Within that few hours, everybody's going to share saying, hey, CA is coming, NRC is coming, right? It worked beautifully for her. But I have my thing here is, I think that when you start a a social first brand, and you do all the things right, which for me I feel is still being a bit more organic driven, like you're trying to make sure you reach human beings, you can reach a situation like her. Now I think big brands who have had social media accounts since these platforms have been around, right, like newspapers jumped on these immediately. Big brands who've made a lot of mistakes over the years and stuff, I think they might be carrying a liability with some of these pages, because there's no longer room to pivot. There's no longer room to fix this. Like you said, you can't kill a million bots. A million bots, how are you going to get rid of them?
You can. To be very honest, I think social media is very dynamic. You can change your approach. I'm sure it was Succession, right?
Oh, no, sorry.
Oh my God, dude, you should watch it. It's amazing. It's about News Corporation. But anyway, so the point is, I think the plot in that, I guess I can talk about it. The show's done. The plot in that is at some point, the next generation of the family, which runs the news, wants to break away and create a new sort of format of news, which is like in 100 characters and so forth, right? A lot like what Twitter would be. I don't know if you've looked at, I think we've spoken about this a long time back, this publication called Pure Wow, which has 1:37 p.m. Check it out, 137pm.com. They do a lot of content, and it's social first publishing. It's catered for that. So if you open up, open up 137, how it appears is like how a Google search ad would appear. There's headline 1, there's headline 2, and there's body. And I think everything is in certain number of characters.
I think I consumed them on Insta. You only shared it.
Yeah. I
don't see their website. Do I see?
There is a website too. So if you look at the website, it's designed like an Instagram post. So there's an image, headline 1, headline 2, story.
Yeah.
And it's made because that's how people like to consume. So a lot of the problem with legacy brands and legacy publications is that they haven't adapted to the new form of distribution. And that's a function of the people in those positions.
Exactly.
If you are 50 plus, and I'm assuming a lot of the decision makers are, it's hard to do it, especially if you haven't spent all your life slogging through to try and build it.
Yeah.
There are some exceptions in the world that I've seen. One entity and organization that has taken to every single platform like knife to butter is WWE. Ridiculous, dude. They were on Twitter in 2007. There's a platform that came up, I remember, in 2009 or something called Tout, which is basically like a wine channel, 10-second videos or something. They took to that. They, I think, have one of the largest audience bases on YouTube. They're a content company,
Monster,
right? Exactly. And
they were probably the first big Western entertainment brand to make it to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
There's like a WWE ring in Riyadh right now.
And they have a great partnership with them because the product is such, it connects, right? It's not sport, it's not entertainment, it's somewhere in between. It just works for everybody.
When I was in the lowest time of my life, I was just watching wrestling videos to get away from it all. Like, man, it really saved my life. It was good.
Yeah, I get what you mean. I'm a fan. I still consume it. So I think there's a lot of things to be learned from some entity like that who I think have done great work.
Yeah.
But I think also because content and gripping your audience with it is in the heart of that business.
Yeah.
It thrives on that.
The drama.
Right. So hence you shed your personal prejudices and values and beliefs and then do what's best for business, quoting a term from the show itself. So I think that approach would help. And I think a lot of them probably haven't done that. And isn't the Daily Wire or
one of them, yeah,
which is that? No, it's not the Young Turks.
Yeah.
That's
YouTube show,
the Shapiro.
He comes on them sometimes.
Yeah, it's a right wing thing, right? I haven't consumed much of that, but they started out as a pure YouTube and social media news channel, didn't they?
They did, and long before Shapiro was associated with them, I think they were just known as the place for political discussions.
Correct.
There's a lot of people in that space. They were one of the pioneers.
Yeah. So why did they do that? Because I think it basically broke the clutter and it gave you efficiency. the reason why I think that's not happening in India, like I said, is because, like I was just giving an example of how the advertising rates are fixed for print versus digital. Doing things the way they have been doing ensures profitability. It keeps the money coming in, and there's no need to change from it. So when they are forced to at some point, what will happen is these large organizations will just fire a bunch of people on top and then just bring young people in and then say, okay, now this is the way we go.
But
it's inevitable.
But take an example here. What is the smallest tier of influencers in India? 1 lakh followers ka? Let's say.
Less than that. I think people...
There's nano influencers and all, right?
Yeah, like we would work with people even who have 5,000 influencers, who have 6,000, because I think
but
today...
quality audience. 6,000 real people,
Honestly, as an advertiser, I have no way to measure if the audience is real or no. I have a metric called engagement rate, which is I can measure what percentage of that audience interacts with content and then make my hypothesis and thesis with it. But the point is, you want to go to someone who's that small because the larger ones take money to promote and advertise anything. The smaller ones probably would look like they genuinely believe in the product. It's authenticity. And
that matters.
Yeah, and the economics work. You're paying them 1/100th of what you would pay. Like sometimes you don't even pay them, you do barters. And as a product or a service company, it just works better.
So I'm not sure where the flow should be, but let's take 1 lakh influencers who are at the 1 lakh level. I don't know how many such influencers are in India. Are we talking tens of thousands, lakhs?
I think millions.
It's millions.
Yeah,
right?
lakhs and millions.
It's nuts how many there are.
Yeah.
I think all of them are getting engagement numbers which are not rigged, more or less, let's say mostly, which would beat probably 99% of news brands right now. And I think if you look at it that way, if they're running a ship and news brands are running a ship and you're in the same ocean of social media, they are obviously doing better.
Yeah,
but they're also paying for themselves. They're able to make a living out of it.
And that's exactly what I said, right? I think, there are certain limitations as a news brand. You can't do certain things. But the point is, I think, again, we go back to the same conversation, which is width over depth. Your top of the funnel has to be because of width. Like, let's look at this way. This conversation may be 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever. Percentage of people who are going to watch the 2 and 3 hours is going to be minute. But if I could extract a 5-minute clip of this and promote that individually, that will get 200, 300 times the viewership that the original conversation would have.
Yeah.
And I think that's just the function of how the world is today. And I think accepting that probably is the first step towards fixing your viewership problems or readership problems.
I think so. And I think that's where maybe media is a bit stuck. A lot of media is just that we have made this content, here it is.
Now everybody will
now make the next content, here it is. There is no really smart targeting, width versus depth thing.
Correct.
There's also no effort, I feel, to create new mediums within the mediums, whereas the people we report on and write about are doing it all the time. The influencers are doing it all the time. The expert doctors, the celebrity nutritionists, everyone, all these guys are really getting good at making their own brands within the brand, right? Building their own network and platform, essentially being what we are, publishers. And
so what's Faye D'Souza doing well then? What is she doing right from a journalistic point of view? So
she fixed the problem of, I think, young people not reading, because it turns out that on the internet, where are you reading? A long ass Instagram caption? I don't think most people even click that more button to read the full caption. That's out. Twitter, when it used to be maybe one tweet, I think they would read it. But now that you've got blue tick and long tweets, I don't think a lot of people are reading the long ones. I like to. They're basically articles, but it's not an ingrained habit. So if you're not doing that, but you also want to read the news, you're kind of out of luck, because until then you were restricted to how often is news shown to you on these platforms, which is really not a lot. Now, what she managed to do well, and it's something I find so interesting because a lot of people are so angry about it, not about her.
You mean the journalists?
No. I would say journalists and maybe older readers.
Is that anger or jealousy?
No. I'm not saying about her. You know what pisses people off? Text in an image. They're like, why can't you just have like an actual text, like a headline or something? Like, why do you have to bake this text into an image? I don't know why, but this irritates a lot of people. They think it's a very dumb way of putting out content. As it turns out, I think that's how Gen Z really likes to read content on Instagram. Now, you can't select the text and copy paste it. I think that's what pisses some people off. You really can't share just the text. You can only share the image, either on Instagram or you screenshot and share it somewhere else. So I think people who come from that mindset, right, are the ones who could probably never fathom why this works. Right. But if you look at me from a reader POV, on Instagram, my access to text, we're thinking of text as, what is it? What is the word? HTML text, right? You think that, oh, news must only be HTML text in an article, in this. The moment you bake that text on an image, suddenly you are putting news in the same carousel of things that your audience is seeing. So they're seeing a Netflix post, they're seeing a post on their friend, they're seeing your news. The format is now the same. I think that's pretty much it. I really think what really made her blow up was that simple format where I don't have to go through loops to read this stuff. I don't have to go click a link in a bio. And Instagram link in bio is broken, man. It takes like 10 seconds to load, no matter which the page is. This is just instant. I immediately get the news. I feel like I think she did, maybe she thought about it or didn't, but she looked at where her audience was and she said, I will come to you. And she just figured them out.
And it's actually quite simple, right?
It's so simple.
So why aren't other brands doing it?
Well, now a few brands have started doing it, but with a bit more detail. They're like, okay, now a typical news story is a headline, a good photo by Reuters or something, a strapline, and then the article with a read more button in the middle, so you increase your click-through engagement, whatever, like time spent on the article, right? That was the thinking. Now they're like, okay, Instagram, we'll give you the photos also. Faye doesn't have photos, right? We'll give you photo from the scene, put a headline on top of it, and put our logo on it. I'm seeing some brands do this, but they're not getting Faye's numbers. And I think the main reason is that she got there first and she's like holding it.
Also, it's because she's a human.
She's a human being. No, I mean like I guess brands can't beat a human. That's the other side.
I think relatability to an individual is a lot more than a brand.
It is, although she doesn't put too much of herself into these posts, right? She's just stating the news, straight and simple. You happen to know her because she was a very beloved anchor before it. So you know she's also like a nice human being.
This is the same thing as Fabrizio Romano. He's doing it right too. Like I was just telling you, right? He's built a network on the back of which he gets stories in time.
Yeah.
And he uses that network to basically publish stories in time, which is verified. And I think there's a sense of trust. I think that's the word. There's trust built with him.
That's it.
Now, the only way that changes is if they break the trust. And that's in their hands. So as long as they continue to do good work, I think that audience will just stay loyal. And I think it's like going to a doctor, right? You don't want to consume news from 3 different sources.
Yeah.
Like you just want to get from your one, believe in it, and keep going through with that relationship until maybe something happens and changes. So and I think for me, I started with Fabrizio Romano. Just about this year, I started following another journalist who also writes for The Athletic called David Ornstein. And I'm consuming stuff from him as well, just to see the difference, because now I'm like just curious. That's about it. But otherwise, no. I follow a few of journalists who I think report on certain, like Ariel Helwani does a lot of MMA and wrestling. I think Laurie Whitehall does a lot of Manchester United centric news. Andy Mitton. These are the kind of journalists that I follow for sport based on my interests. But otherwise, I think, and it's the same thing that's happening here, I think we all follow Harsha Bogle, for example, right? I think he is a verified, good, reliable source for information.
I follow fake Harsha Bogle tweets. Have you seen that guy on Twitter?
I have. I love Twitter because of that. Twitter is amazing. There's a fake Elon Musk also. And recently, I think Elon put some tweet out, and then the fake guy commented below that, sorry, this came out from the wrong account. It was amazing. And there's a fake AOC. Oh, I love that page. Like, absolutely love it. So I think like that's just a trend, I guess. I think over a period of time you'll see that. And I also think we're in the age where a lot of individualism is promoted, accepted, and there's a lot more.
Actually, taking that as a rule of thumb, do you think social media prefers the individual to the brand?
Of course.
Not a very revolutionary thing to say, right?
No, it's not. I think it's just.
So what do you do with all these brands then?
So I'll tell you, it's also a mix, right? Brands have the money. Individuals bring you the users. So the balance between the two is very important. Like a Twitter gold badge, if you ever looked at it, it's like some, I don't know how much, it's a few lakhs.
$1,000 a month.
No, it's $1,000. How much? Do the math on that. It's like some grand, 65.
Almost 80K, yeah.
Yeah, right. It's almost $1 lakh. And if you need it for a year, you get a discount on it, but still about 7 lakhs, 8 lakhs, something like that.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. How many individuals are going to pay for that? And it's not meant for them. Like I paid for the Twitter Blue. I just wanted to see what the features are.
Yeah. Some features are worth it.
Yeah, some are good, right? That costs like, sorry?
You get Grok also, right?
Yeah, now I think, but I've never used it to be honest. But that's like 5-6K, right? So a brand will always be ready to pay more, and advertising works because of that. So this is the same conversation. I think you need a balance of the two. Individuals bring users, and then the platforms monetize on the back of that with ads and brands. So the two can't coexist without each other. Impossible.
It sounds like the brands are sort of paying to let the individuals
Yeah.
exist. But the brands are paying to let the people who our audience actually wants to follow exist.
Exactly.
That's a better way of putting it.
There was a case in Australia, right, where I think Facebook was asked to pay
Pay publishers,
for the news. That went through. They are doing that.
I think, but I think the result, I didn't follow it too well. There was a big fear that it would have led to just less news being shown to people.
Correct.
I haven't really followed up. I don't know if it ended up reducing engagement. Google News ended up forming a partnership with a bunch of news brands, so they end up sharing the revenue with those people. But the problem with news is it's a very big ocean with a lot of ships, right? You have these big brands, you have middle brands, you have small brands. If you want the news of the day, you need all three. So like in the United States, there's a lot of respect given to local newspapers. Like each city has their own newspaper who are primary sources.
Right.
So like one day a big news events, like Baltimore is not a small city, but this whole bridge collapsing thing made it a global news kind of thing. Baltimore local newspapers are very important to understand what happened to that bridge, because somebody who's reporting from New York will not know. They don't have the context of years and years of stuff that happened. There was supposed to be some obstacle that would have prevented the ship from hitting the bridge, right? But corners were cut a few decades ago, so that wasn't there. There was a perfect storm of events. You need local papers to tell you that. So for news to work, you need to have players of all sizes, all sharing information, and all of them being allowed to exist right now. That is like a very tricky thing in a country like India, because if you're really small and you're trying to do news and you do something that pisses off a politician, the laws generally seem to screw you over more than they protect you. You can get in a lot of trouble. You need to be in a bigger publication before you have the independence to do dangerous stories, because then they'll have a lawyer and retainer who can at least protect you, and that's when courts will take notice. So you can get arrested for defamation any day, but if you're someone from a big newspaper, the High Court or the Supreme Court is going to step in and be like, what are you doing? You can't arrest people just for like reporting things. Defamation is not supposed to be used against journalism unless it's really blatantly false. The way defamation is being used now is not that. You have this situation where it's super risky to be a journalist, and what I think is interesting is that a lot of people still choose to do so anyway, and they tend to be journalists who are not as famous as Faye D'Souza or anyone else. It's a small crime reporter in some place who uncovers something about an MLA or something like that, right? He's doing the most dangerous, difficult part of this job. He has the least protection. He also has the least audience, I feel, with the system that exists now.
But that's not going to change,
I believe, my view is that I think another medium has to emerge for truth and information.
How?
I don't know. I just think it has to. Maybe I'll build it. It's just that it seems to me that social media is just not the greatest place for news to live on, because at the end of the day, news is often, we think that the news is bad. The reality is we live in the greatest period of human history. It's often said, right? This is the most prosperous, the least genocide time of human history, but this is also the most covered time of human history. So you're more aware of how bad things were. Like if we had the same news coverage 100 years ago, oh my God, would you think like humanity is ending? Like it was a horrible time to be alive, right?
For sure.
So social media, you're there to, now we go back, I think, to addiction and dopamine and stuff, right? We've got this thing that gives you these bursts of dopamine. You keep going back to it and hitting yourself up, get that dose. And memes do a great job. Viral reels do a great job. Seeing your friends do fun stuff about it does a great job. News is not so nice in that moment. It's like I'm injecting tar into my...
Then I think news just needs reinvention.
Well,
more than the medium needing change.
It's also that the fact is the news, right? It's got no duty to be just positive or happy, because that's not what the truth is. It's also, I think it's just about, we need to value as a society information being high quality and getting it from the right place. I think if you're a businessman, for example, there is an incentive to pay for high quality news, like say The Economist or Financial Times. If you're operating at a level where global markets affect you, you probably are not going to get that from free news. That's when you start to get into, I need to pay for information. I need to curate. If you're in the celeb business, you probably need to be reading Vogue and Elle and Esquire and stuff, because that's your industry. That's what affects you. You not being in that magazine tomorrow is a kind of a big deal for you. You need to make sure you're in all these places, right? So that's where I think media has this role where people need to also feel a stake in being a part of it and in mixing it. I think social media has not been great for them because it just seems like engagement wise, going back to the white thing, influencers are just better. They can give you everything the news brands give you.
So why not use an influencer for distribution?
That's what I'm heading to.
Like,
I think
a lot of brands are doing this now, where they're hiring micro influencers to be their presenters on social media to get better distribution of the messaging.
So my only doubt is, why have the brand in the loop at all? Have you followed Johnny Harris on YouTube? He used to work at Vox, and he was famous for his very visual infographic explainers. Anything with geography and maps, super high quality content. Actually, higher quality than anything a big brand has put out. One day he was just like, I do all this myself. I will just do it myself. I don't need the brand. He's a brand unto himself. Yeah. And today there's a whole generation of YouTubers who do this stuff.
Yeah, and I think what will happen is over time, he will realize that his bandwidth is limited.
Yeah,
and he will need a team, and he will build it, and slowly he will turn into the kind of corporation that he was when he left the original one.
It happened.
It's cyclic. That's just how it is.
Linus Tech Tips, I feel did that. They started to get more and more people. But even now, except Linus and one other guy, I don't see personalities. I would only watch it when Linus is in the video or when the other guy is in the video.
Right.
Because they're like individuals who I want. I feel like YouTube in every field so I have a lot of interest, say defense, anime, economics. In each of these spaces, I see individual creators just killing it compared to any big brand right now. My hunch is the trend is going to continue that way. A lot of people will probably move away from brands, start their own brand, have your 15 minutes of fame and then stop it and then build a company again. But the readers, right, are going to keep jumping in from individual to individual to individual. I don't see how they jump to a brand. And I'm curious how that will play out right now.
So you're telling me there's no news publication there, at least in India, let's put it that way, that's able to captivate the users?
They do, but maybe for 5 minutes a day. And everyone gets their turn, I think. But it's not the same captivation that a person who follows PewDiePie or a YouTuber, it's not the same fan.
But that's different, right? That'll always be the case. Like, look at 20 years back, weren't people more interested in what Shah Rukh was up to or what Amitabh Bachchan was doing more than what was coming out in any of the news publications or even politics for that matter?
But I would argue that right now, some of these influencers, 20 years ago, we'd have called them equivalent to Shah Rukh Khan. And I think today, it's probably true that some of them are bigger than Shah Rukh Khan. If you think about just the number of people in your audience who are so obsessed with you every day, right? Who are willing to watch you. I noticed this with influencers who are at that 10,000 to 30,000 mark, because they can actually have audiences who see everything you make every day, who will go start a forum just for you and comment on that forum just for you. They'll be in your paid chats, your Patreon, your this and that. Pretty diehard audience that brands, right, would kill to have. A lot of newspapers used to have these comment sections. Now the trend is to disable them because, I don't know, it just got crazy and stuff. I think a lot of newspapers, if you, for a single day, gave them an influencer's audience, they would be like, oh my God, this is what we want. We just want this. But I don't see it happening. It's just not, it just seems like two different audiences, two different groups.
What is the future of media then? Do you think news entities as what they are right now will die?
I don't know. I mean, I think regulation is going to affect it a lot. We are entering a stage where increasingly there is regulation on, can you allow fake news on a platform? Can you allow defamation? Can you allow harmful content? And as it turns out, the way platforms look at it, the arbitrators of information are news brands, right? So they want Reuters to fact check something. Or they want, Twitter is doing some interesting thing where they want the community to fact check stuff. It's not just some arbitrary third-party entity. So I think, as with all things, regulation is going to decide how and where news evolves and where it goes. But I think when it comes to the storytelling aspect of the craft, right, I just can't shake off the feeling that that's, we're in a small party. That is a raging raucous of a party that's always happening in another building. And they're going to keep at it and they're going to have a better time. Whereas in our field, we're going to see more layoffs. We're going to see ChatGPT make salaries even lower. So like I said, starting salaries are low. Oh man, it's getting a lot lower. I've already seen that in some of the jobs in the market. But
that's inevitable. AI is going to do that to everybody. It's going to do that in our line of work. Any line of work where a human isn't efficient is going to get replaced by AI. There's just nothing about it.
But that way, again, going back to influencer, you've seen how much money some people are willing to, the YouTube thanks thing, we can give some dollars. My God, dude, like some dudes are throwing $100 and stuff at this guy. Does anybody walk by a newspaper and be like, you know what, $100 bro, like take it. You guys earned it, killing it. I have a feeling that this urge to support people you like, that won't go away unless it's regulated or it's taxed or something.
Sure.
That'll probably not die, but yeah, definitely everyone may make less money.
Right. That's no like doubt about it. That's gonna happen.
How do
But
we,
you know, what you just spoke of, that raging party in the other building, wasn't something like the Late Show, for example, with Jon Stewart, created for that reason, that people are not consuming news in this format.
exactly.
Let's make it happen in this format. Or John Oliver, for that matter.
I mean, let's look at it another way. PewDiePie and all these influencers who tended to upload, by the time you come home from work, you got a new video and you watch them every day. They are just doing what late night TV show hosts have done for decades. It was that one person who you like, who you want to watch every day.
Right.
He'll talk a little bit about the news, a little bit about the memes, and then he does his unique bit and he goes. They just took that format and they made it work on YouTube.
Yeah.
But humans have always liked people like that.
Yeah.
The difference is the middleman, the late show format, which only hires one person every 10, 20 years, right? That's been wiped out. And you have a million late night show hosts now. I think as a general trend in society, middlemen get wiped out. So I think that may be what
Internet
we'll
is
see.
the ultimate middleman. Like, it's just what it is. That's just you can't do anything about it. I
You
think
can't
that's just
be
nature.
be the person wiping
Yeah.
out like
Yeah.
the others. I think a great thing to do is find places where there have been middlemen in information and cut them out of the loop, and you go and do it. You know, you sort of arbiter
Right.
information.
What's your learning process? How do you keep yourself updated with all of this coming in? And
Well, I think I've curated my algorithm carefully. Like, one of the reasons I was bugged about Musk, his takeover of Twitter, was it reduced the quality of sources that kept coming to me on Twitter. You know, I would find I'm kind of a defense buff, so I used to follow a lot of hardcore defense people, you know, soldiers on the ground to generals to analysts to defense companies to people who make videos about this and stuff. And I started to see a lot less of people who were just out there showing, you know, cool stuff they know, and I saw a lot more of ideologically driven. So Twitter was a part of it. For years and years, I would like aggregator sites like Reddit and Hacker News. Nowadays, I would say it's Hacker News. The forum by Y Combinator, really high quality forum, leans towards tech and IT and stuff, but it's been a great place for me to catch a big AI project within minutes or hours of it launching. And, you know, sometimes the news will cover it 2-3 days later. I like to go to places where there are high quality readers. So you see a headline. I really like places where there's a headline like Reddit, and then there's this massive comment section where people duke it out and you can infer a little bit more about the truth. If something's wrong about the story here. So Hacker News, for example, I love defense and airplanes. There was a post about the SR-71 Blackbird. This dude in the comment section just casually comments who was a Blackbird pilot. Like, his proof for it also. That's an amazing thing on the internet. I like places like that where you get, you know, okay, fine, here's a bunch of journalists talking about it. Now here's a bunch of people with lived experience talking about it. That story comment combo, I think, is beautiful for me. Otherwise, I think YouTube, I trust the algorithm. Each day I push it to a different side. Show me something about economics. Show me these creators talking about this, that. I get my fix, I would say, in a day of maybe dopamine, a lot from just consuming enlightening content, I would say. I really like Vice's tagline. Like, it's such a beautiful way to phrase your brand, right? Not we are the first or we are the best breaking news, #1 magazine in the world, whatever. No, your definitive guide to enlightening information. I feel like good journalism should just be that. You will open something. I don't care about hiking, but you've written such a beautiful 4-page article about hiking that I actually read it and I'm like, damn, hiking is pretty interesting. I should try hiking. You know, I love when good stories pull you out of your comfort zone and take you into places like that. So I kind of rely on aggregators, algorithms, and newsletters, I would say, at this point. It's a mix of me letting the system show me cool stuff because I think the system does do a good job if you tweak it right, and a mix of me curating curators at this point who do a good job. But one thing I would say is pick up a newspaper and read it cover to cover. I'd be surprised if you don't find at least a bunch of random stories that you end up talking to people about that day.
okay,
It doesn't translate to web. A lot of newspaper stories don't go online, but it's still a very interesting medium. It's just that the habit has been wiped out to pick it up. Do you feel a lot of people these days tend to have a low opinion of journalism, the word journalism, and maybe what it represents also?
mixed, I would say. I think the view of primetime journalism, at least in tier 1, has become that it's all noise. whoever shouts the most gets eyeballs. And I think that blew up 10 years back. Now I don't think anyone even like with a little bit of sense would even watch unless you want entertainment. You're like, oh, let me put this channel on. Oh, it's fun. They're all screaming. Otherwise, I don't think there's that. But I think good journalists are respected. But now that you ask me again, because I consume so little news from such verified sources and journalists per se, I can't really think in my head who's that one person who I hold in that high regard. Because I think, at least for me, that realization has come that everybody works for an organization, most of them at least, and organizations have agendas and they're profit driven. So your opinions are going to be biased.
Yeah.
And nothing you can do about it. But having said that, I really liked Tucker Carlson's
the Putin.
I really enjoyed it. I haven't watched any of his other ones, but I think that's quite brave and quite smart in the direction that he's doing. I think it's a little different from what Faye D'Souza is doing probably.
Yeah.
But in terms of format, but I think he's in that direction. I think that's the future of journalism too. I think you'll build individual reputation and
well, you have to also look at it this way. A lot of other publications also asked Putin for an interview and he turned them all down. He picked the guy who he figured is, not going to interrupt him too much, ask him too tough questions. That's in contrast to Trump, who would give interviews with very hostile people because he had that feeling like I'll take on anybody. So that way, I think like Trump is a better content creator than Putin because he's gonna take on anybody in an interview. Of course,
and he's been in that game for like 2 decades with his show and everything. He knows it.
He doesn't believe in bad publicity. It's just publicity, which is also a smart way to go about things.
I mean, once you're in politics, those lines are anyway blurred, right?
Yeah.
What's your take on the news right now, considering we are approaching an election? I don't know if it's because I'm a little checked out or not. I just don't feel it is as aggressive and volatile as it was maybe for the last 2 editions. Do you get that feeling? Or is it because this time there's a sort of feeling that Modi is going to win it again? So
I'm scared because I feel before every election cycle, you think it's going to be fought on this issue or that. And if it fizzles out or whatever, big thing happen. Like that's just look at it that way. Some big thing will happen before the election that will define what's going to run it. In the US, I would say right now that big thing is this whole migrant crisis on the border, right? In India, I think it's a little scary because things that are happening right now, none of them are the big thing yet. And I'm a little worried about what that big thing is because when a politician has no incentive to make it only about development or their promises or policies, because even in 2019, I don't think it boiled down to manifestos. It boiled down to Pulwama and big thing that happened pre-election.
But that's also because I think in that election, there was a lot more credibility in the opposition, right?
There was a lot more economic criticism against Modi just before Pulwama, right? And when the big thing happened, it switched the narrative completely away from economics and more towards national security and stuff. So I'm just curious. I think both parties are going to be throwing out some big thing. From the opposition side, they have thrown the electoral bonds thing, right? And it's politics. So there's going to be a counter. And I'm waiting to see what that counter is. I don't think we know yet what the real debate and topic is. And of course, it's such a weird space because you'll see all these pollsters coming up with numbers and estimates and all, and they are so meaningless. Like most of these guys have been wrong so consistently. I'm amazed that it's still like a thing. It is a science, but it's, like with science, there's a lot of guesswork.
Right.
So I'm just worried about what that big thing could be. If there's no big thing and the election is just fought as it is, it's interesting. It'd be a boring election in a long time. I don't know. The problem is you don't really get a pulse before an election.
But are you looking at election as a way to bump up your numbers, increase readership? Is that the kind of thought process that comes in?
Not for me, because I'm in a health journalism space, so we're looking at totally.
Does the industry look at it that way? To acquire more users?
The election is...
to be like from a marketer's perspective, it's a great opportunity.
Well, the thing with what I feel happens in news cycles is the election is just another thing in the news cycle. It happens to be a thing that lasts longer. But journalism is just hopping from news cycle to news cycle. And it's not always the best thing in the world to be talking about what everyone's talking about. You're not guaranteed views. So for example, let's say sports, when the World Cup's happening, just because you do a segment on the World Cup doesn't mean you're going to get views. I've seen this play out where we get like 100 views for talking about the World Cup around the World Cup time because there's 1,000 people talking about it. Sometimes it's better to talk about stuff people aren't talking about. That's what grows, and especially algorithms like that, right? It doesn't want 10 people having the same boring, nuanced view. give that one guy like an insane view, and that's going to blow up. So likewise in journalism, it's just part of the job. There's an election, you got to cover it. Once the election ends, there's the induction, you cover that. There's some other thing, you cover that. Ukraine war happens, you cover that. You're just constantly jumping from thing to thing to thing. And who wins in this space? Sometimes it's the first person to cover it. Sometimes it's the person who in covering it makes the news themselves. So Tucker Carlson talking to Putin, right? That was a news item as well as a person covering the news. So that's pretty much where we are at election coverage, and it's very ADHD and hyperlocal based. So don't look at it nationally, right? You're voting in your area, in your city. What's going to blow up is somebody talking about your MP and another newspaper talking about that MP, and both of them like throwing these news stories at each other. So it's there. I mean, I also don't consume too much pre-election political news coverage. I'm more interested in just reportage. What is the government doing? What is happening? What are the policies? How serious are you about these policies? Like, is this something you're actually going to push, or are you just doing this to make some noise and then, once everything's done, you don't actually push it forward? So I don't know. I think it's going to be a mix. What you'll see during election coverage is, besides the big guys that are going to show up in your feed, a lot of people will cover the election, and a lot of them are not actually going to get a lot of views. I feel like there's this famous thing about journalism having a shiny new thing syndrome. If there's a new technology, a new platform, everyone's going to rush to it and try to make something of it. The same applies to news cycles, I feel, where just because there is something big happening and you have to cover it, it's doesn't guarantee you success or numbers or even engagement. What I think news brands ideally should be focusing on is, what are my readers interested in? Can I give them that?
Right.
And that can problematically also mean bias. If my readers like a certain thing, I want to try give them that. So sometimes you might just have to look at it as bitter medicine. I will give you the medicine you like, but I'll try to include a little stuff that's contrary to it, maybe to make it more wholesome. You could see it that way. It's tough, and I'm not sure. I'm not too clued in on politics coverage also. So
that's refreshing, considering you were glued in at one point in time.
Yeah, it's bad for your mental health.
Yeah,
it's so bad. At the same time, like you, I make sure the big stuff does reach me.
Right.
And to be honest, like Faye D'Souza does a very good job of that.
Right.
Good coverage of stuff. But if I'm a voter, I think I would like to see more stuff from my constituency, from my MP. Because they do say, like, in democracy on an ideal level, you shouldn't be thinking about the national politic when you're voting. It's got to be about who is the best person for you. You need to act as a self-interested agent. If what's best for you is also best for the country, awesome. Sometimes it could be two different things. So I feel like I'd like to see a bit more of that. I'd like to see a bit more ground reporting and news and things, stuff that I actually need to vote on, right? Like for me, I think my MP is Shashi Tharoor. So, and I think the counter MP is Rajiv Chandrasekhar. So would like to know a bit more about that. But that's in another city I don't live in also now. Right. So there is that disconnect.
Got it. Great. This is a great conversation. You have anything you want to ask me?
You tell me actually, like, you consume news, and you mentioned that, there are certain news spaces you like to get stuff from. How do you think news should evolve to better suit this future?
So I don't trust any news forum. I don't trust any journalist. I just think everyone's working for the agenda. Much like most politicians, right? Most politicians are working for the party. There's no individual whatever. It's collective agendas. So I just think I pick and choose what I want to hear and not hear, and then I moderate that. To be very honest, what I've realized also over a period of time is, at least with my life, that no matter who's in power, no matter how what's happening in the country at a macroeconomic level or cultural level, it has very little impact in my day-to-day life. So whether I consume news, whether I don't consume news, it doesn't matter. Now it comes down to my personal interests of what I want to consume. And that makes me happy or sad. Like when Ronaldo left Man United a couple of years back, I was very sad. I was equally happy when he came like 3 years ago. And that was like childhood coming back. And then that news broke over a period of, I think, 6 hours on a Friday evening or something. And that was amazing. Like I was following all kinds of news channels for it. So I think it just comes down to what you want and what you don't. I at least look at it that way. I follow a lot of publications from my industry about advertising, about tech, about big tech at least, because they influence what we do so much. And I'm always looking at updates and information. And I think the narrative I put together in my head, so I like information coming to me. I don't like narratives coming to me because I think it's just biased and I have no time for that. It's one of the reasons I stopped consuming news as a whole. Everyone has a narrative. So if AI can deliver news to me, I would love it. Because today I think it's still a little neutral. That'll change too for sure. I'm quite confident that people will gear it to their say ideology and principle. It's just you can't help it. But as long as that doesn't happen, I think a very neutral source of information is the best way to consume news.
Are you more conscious about how it seems like you're very mindful about how you consume news? Is that the same approach you have to consuming the rest of content?
100%.
So even with reels and entertainment, you're picking what you want to see.
I block almost every single one of those Bollywood remix dance reels that come my way. I absolutely hate it and I don't consume it. Like even if people send it in groups, etc. Like I make it a conscious effort. Like there's so many creators I've just blocked because I have no time. I generally do not like to consume. Like I think I have a limit that I keep between 200 to 300 accounts that I follow on Instagram, and that's about it. Twitter, I still go through it because I think it's just a lot more bite-sized. You don't consume media, I consume text. I read fast, so I go through it. But a long time ago, I made it a point. I have all notifications off on my phone. The only notification I get is probably Uber when it arrives. Actually, I don't even have that anymore. I have Mama Yatri. I don't take cabs. But it's just calls. So there's a good chance you call me on WhatsApp and I don't get the call. It happens a lot. So I'm very conscious of that. I don't want to. It's just, I don't think my attention getting disturbed for whatever reason is worth it. So I'm a little different in that sense.
Now, that is also a broader trend, I think. Ever since Apple and these companies started digital well-being, right? People are consciously tuning out of the medium itself.
I started this in 2018. I think a year into starting Virality, I realized I consume way too much. And I took a call to not. And I do that even with shows for that matter. I haven't watched House of Dragons. I haven't watched a whole bunch of those latest Netflix shows. I didn't have Netflix for a long period of time because I used to activate my Netflix account when House of Cards would come out because I was a big fan and I would just binge it over a weekend and stop. And I realized how in-depth I would go. So COVID and that time I had during COVID created all these bad habits. So now I went on every single OTT.
I'll give you a two-part question.
Yeah.
How much time in a day do you spend consuming content, and how much percentage of that is news in some form or the other?
I don't have a number, but I can say, I consume a lot of information, a lot. So I don't know how much of that you would call news and not. But I'm pretty aware of everything that's happening around in pop culture, sport, technology, politics. I sort of know. So I don't look at it from the lens of news. If you ask me, like branded news, probably zero. Like accidentally maybe. Like if I'm at home and there's something that's happened, you want to quickly put on the channel to check. Or like I remember I consumed a lot of news around Karnataka election last year. A lot. That's about it. And I might consume a lot this year when the election season truly kicks in. But apart from that, I don't think I am just interested.
But how many hours are you doing content? By content, you're looking at your phone, Instagram, YouTube.
I do. So my phone activity is like 7 hours a day, I think. 6 to 7 hours a day. It's quite high. But apart from that, I think when it comes to OTT and all that minute, I think I do about an hour a day.
Okay, that is just OTT.
OTT or YouTube or some. I'm a ferocious podcast listener. So like yesterday I did 3 podcasts.
You listen to?
Yeah, just yesterday. Like I listened to it while I'm driving. I listen to it.
I'm gonna club that into news though and say like it's similar-ish. Let's say news, analysis, opinion, everything.
Then a lot.
Okay, so here's the ask I have for you. I'm in this business, right? And I want to reach people like you. And these are the hours of the day you're doing such and such and such. Where is the best time and platform for me to reach you right now? If I want to give you what
I would just say Instagram.
Not a podcast or anything else.
Sure, but you would, again, like a podcast by itself wouldn't scale in the short run. It'll take a long period of time. Look at Joe Rogan.
No, leaving scaling. I'm saying I want to reach you personally. In your day, where are you okay with opening the door for me to come in?
So this is how I look at it, right? And I'll give you an example of how we would do it here. We would shoot this as a 3-hour podcast or 2-hour podcast. That is what I call a pillar content. That pillar goes and sits on YouTube and sits in our repository, and that's it. What I would like to do from this is pick out clips or micro pieces that I think are scalable and easily consumable, maybe say 3 minutes, 6 minutes, whatever. I would extract those, put it up on YouTube in the form of clips, right? And any other format or long form. I don't think there's any other viable channel today in this day and age, so only YouTube. I would further pick out micros, which are like a minute long, and I would put that micro up on Instagram in the form of reels, because that gives me distribution.
Yeah.
Or even maybe send it on LinkedIn, because that also today gives me a lot of distribution, and then use those platforms to reach out to people as a hook to get them back into the main content. At the same time, I also think video format alone won't work, because some people like to read, some like to watch, some like to listen. So I would strip the audio out of this, put it up on podcast and Spotify, so that there are some listeners listening to that. I would also extract, like I would take stills of you and me sitting and talking,
and some text,
and what exactly as text, because some people like to read micro again as a hook. If they're interested, they can go and watch the main content. Similarly, I would also try and see, which I want to do with these guys I've been talking about for a while, is can you create infographics? Can you create designs, right? Can you do something fun? And to be honest, this framework actually hasn't changed since 7-8 years since I started out in this line of work. It has always been the case. I think from time to time, trends will change and certain formats would work on certain platforms, but this is essentially how you scale. And if you can afford to go wide across channels and afford to sort of be present everywhere and without depleting a bandwidth, that would be the ideal way to expand. And then you'll figure, after a while, you'll see, okay, I'm getting this much on Instagram, this much on YouTube, this much on Twitter, and then that's about it.
But I think you get the dilemma here, right?
Which
because let's say I'm the news brand now. What you're essentially asking me to do is, you have so many different mediums of content you're taking in a day. You're asking me to fight with everyone else in this space.
Of course.
So now you're...
But you're already in that game.
We have to anyway.
You've always been in that game.
To put it another way, this is the ask of news right now. So now let's say you don't like these dance reels that are coming. That's a great time for some informative short content I put out to come reach you. But now you already have the podcast you're listening to, right? I need to come and find my way to demand your screen time there to earn it.
Yeah.
You already have visual content, and I'm going to club infographics in the space where you have this much space for visual content today. I've got to come in there and beat the best sports photos you're seeing today, beat the best infographics you're seeing today. I need to fit in there. And on top of that, short videos, which everyone on earth is making, I need to come and fight with them too. So that's where I get to that thing about everything being content. When you're making news, right? You are fighting everybody on the internet for attention.
And that's the game.
That's the game.
You're Times of India or Taylor Swift. You are the same real estate in someone's phone.
Exactly. And in their mind.
And you have to fight for that. That's the game. Attention.
Sucks now.
But I think that's not journalist's job. I think that's a job of the distribution team. And if you don't have a distribution team, that's a problem.
Yeah. I should point this out. I think in a lot of journalism, the journalist does everything. Write the story, edit the story, upload the story, package the story, promote the story.
That's a losing strategy in itself. That won't work. So if you have quality in your content, you can charge a premium in your advertising, and then that will supplement in itself. But if you don't have good distribution, you're fucked. And I think that's also one of the problems. I'm sure there are a lot of great journalists out there that I don't even know about. Just because they're not distributed well.
Smaller independent journalists struggle.
But that's the case everywhere, by the way. Yeah. A lot of great actors who are good in acting, for example, do not get gigs today in Bollywood and Hollywood because there's some influencer they can cast for that role who has 10 times the reach, and then that helps the movie as a collective to get better distribution. And it's the same for any profession you would look at. People on LinkedIn. People on LinkedIn are building their profiles, writing long form and giving gyan. Because that enhances their reach, and as a function of which you get noticed by recruiters, which will help you get better job.
You get seen as an expert, right? Yeah.
Even this, right? Even in a lot of ways, what we are doing here in the podcast is also a form of that, to get better distribution for the company that I run, to get better, clients and better fortunes that way. So I think that's just the game. When everybody plays the game, it comes down to quality and comes down to who has the unique niche sorted and who's able to sort of withstand that, and it becomes a long-term thing then.
For me, I think what I really liked about doing this with you, you are coming from a space where I think you understand this industry more than my industry does. And that intersection is not happening enough. I think the ask I would have for journalism today is, I think journalists should start looking at their role in the platform the same way they look at stories. Like, I need to figure out what's happening here, right? Yeah, I think the time is to start pointing the camera towards us as well and being like, I need to figure out how we are existing in this medium. What are we actually doing? Who are we actually speaking to? What do those people think? What does the reader actually think? Not just like a survey where like, hey, how much do you like us on a scale of 3 to 5? No, more like, when do you actually read us? Like, what is the space in your life for this stuff?
But it'll happen.
It has to happen. I think we need to be a bit more journalistic about the reader. start to get to know them more.
It's a trend. I think a lot of industries are taking to it. A lot haven't. Media and publication will have to eventually move in that direction. You'll find a balance between the two, between craft and between distribution. And it's a problem today because everything is new and that maturity in industries haven't come through. But it'll happen. Don't worry. So by the time you are probably in that position of power, you will see a huge change.
Cannot wait for the data.
Yeah. Great. Dude, it's amazing to do this.
You too.
I haven't seen you in years.
Same. I'm glad we started off on this.
Indeed. Hopefully have you back some other day in the future.
Yeah, anytime. Tell me if you want me to get more people.
Oh, done.
I can get like way more hardcore journalists, hopefully.
Sure.
All content creators. Like, I think it's cool when you just have people talking about their craft. You learn so much from each other.
Of course. Probably. I'll tap into your Rolodex at some point.
Yeah, please.
Great.
Awesome, man.